Hello everybody and welcome to Reprieve Media CIC. It's very nice of you to listen again. As always, thank you very much for listening. What we've got coming up for you now is we're going to try and introduce something different here to the Double Handful platform. The horse racing output that we play here on Reprieve Media CIC. We've played many broadcasts before. If you've not heard them before, then go free to check them out. They're on the list of audio that you can find on the website you are listening to this podcast live now. If you scroll down below it, you will see the list of audio for there to listen at your leisure. So you will find all the previous Double Handful shows with our other co-host, Steve Allpress, that you will find them there, listen to them at your leisure. This one, we've got a new host, everybody, a new co-host of Double Handful. We don't know how we found her. We sort of found each other lurking around in the desert of somewhere, the internet. And she has kindly agreed to have a go at this lark here. She's kind of nervous, so if you can just give her the benefit of the doubt for the first 10 minutes or so, I'm sure she'll be fine. Her name is Elizabeth Pepper, and she is going to tell us a little bit about herself quickly before we crack on, and we'll tell you about what the show's about today. Elizabeth, are you there?
I am here.
Fantastic. Nice to meet you, Elizabeth, and thank you very much for being a co-host tonight.
Thank you very much for having me.
So if you'd just like to tell the audience a bit about yourself quickly, if you could, please. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I live in the U.S. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, so I live in the desert. I grew up on the eastern part of the country, and I have just always been kind of a lifelong horse racing fan. I was telling Paul earlier that I grew up when my mom would go to the grocery store, and when I was like 8 or 9, I would sit at the front of the grocery store and read the daily racing forum while she was grocery shopping, and then she would check out and pay for everything and then pick me up on the way back to the parking lot in the car. So I've just kind of always been a fan. I don't really know where it came from, but that's a little bit about me and who I am.
What's your profession then?
I actually work for Arizona State University. I'm an academic advisor, so I help students basically from the time they get to college all the way through graduation. So I help them make sure that they're staying on track to get their degrees. I help direct them towards different resources and that kind of thing.
Oh, understood. Sounds very interesting. How long have you been doing that for?
About a year. Before that, I was working in the athletic department. So we have like college athletics here in the U.S. and I was basically doing the same thing, but with student athletes. So I was trying to make sure that they were like taking classes that would help them towards their degree. And what else? I'm trying to figure out how to explain it. The NCAA, which is the governing body for college athletics, they have different rules and regulations. So I was trying to make sure that that all the student athletes were meeting those rules and regulations, both for their schools and for the NCAA.
Yeah, it's a complex system out there. I'm kind of familiar with NCAA sport because I went through a phase of being a massive NHL ice hockey fan, and there's a few players down there, isn't there, that knows the NCAA team, so I'm kind of familiar with it. And it's quite a intensive program. They do like 3 or 4 years, and so it's all athletics as well. I understand the university is the main way into track and field as well, isn't it?
Yeah. So basically, so there's a lot of different sports. I would say probably the most commonly followed ones would be baseball, basketball, American football, and maybe hockey or lacrosse, maybe softball. I'm not really sure. So I worked with football players. And it was a lot of fun, and it's really cool because then they a lot of times have the opportunity to play professionally afterwards. So it's really cool to just kind of watch them like grow and develop as people, and then see them succeed afterwards is really cool.
Fantastic. Well, we'll talk a little bit now about horse racing. So your interest in horse racing is really just as a hobby. You've had no professional involvement in the sport whatsoever. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I've just been a fan for a really long time. When I was in school, when I was in college, I took some classes. The school that I went to had some classes about horse racing, actually, so I took some of those. And I've kind of developed some friends that are like trainers and jockeys and stuff like that, but I've never worked in the industry at all.
Okay, and so how long have you been following the sport then?
Actually, probably since around 2006. So I guess about 12 years now.
And you obviously follow it quite closely. Do you follow it in just American sport, or do you follow it worldwide?
I mostly follow American racing, and then I'll follow like major superstars internationally. So like I followed like Frankel was one that I followed. So just like the really big ones, but I mostly focus on American racing.
Yeah, there's plenty of it.
Yeah.
So you're not spoiled. Well, you are spoiled for choice, really, because there is plenty of it, isn't there?
Oh yeah, absolutely, and it's cool because it's all across the country. So even when the racing season ends in one track or like one area, it's always going on somewhere else. So it's a year-round kind of thing.
Yeah, I've noticed that. It's a bit. I can't get my head around that. Only certain horses will not race in certain parts of America, will they? Well, it just won't happen.
Yeah, so basically, most of the lower level horses you'll see running. Like they'll make like here in Arizona, we have some pretty small tracks. So there will be some that will run in California and then Arizona. And they'll just kind of go back and forth when the racing season in one place ends, they'll go to the other one. But then, when you get to the big horses and like all the grade 1 horses and stuff like that, they go all over. So they'll go from California to New York to Florida to Kentucky to just pretty much anywhere.
So in Arizona itself then, is there any grade 1 races in Arizona itself? What's the biggest track in Arizona?
The biggest track is Turf Paradise, which is actually right down the street from me. I live about 2 miles away.
Yeah, I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, but it's pretty small. It's a mile track, but it's not like a big track in terms of like money or things like that. So they have a couple of stakes races, but they're not graded.
Yeah, but they're not classed as official graded races for the purpose of the American pattern.
Right, exactly.
Black type races, yeah. Yeah, I understand what you mean. Yeah, there is a subtle difference there without any shadow of a doubt. I've noticed that in a lot of the form as well. So the reason we're here today then is we're going to talk about what I consider really to be quite an incredible performance from a horse, and really the connections as well. Because basically what they've done, from what I can gather, in less than 4 months, we're talking here, I think. The horse concerned called Justify. He made his debut in February and raced again in March this year. So we're talking the horse really has come from zero to hero very quickly, hasn't he?
Absolutely. Yeah, he went from someone that pretty much nobody had really even heard of to being one of the favorites for the Kentucky Derby literally overnight when he ran in his maiden, and then his like odds towards the Derby just kept dropping and dropping as he won his allowance race and then the Santa Anita Derby, and just as he was getting ready, he went from being just a nobody to being just on the tip of everyone's tongue, really.
Yeah, because I started Double Handful up really about we got going about March, April time around the Cheltenham Festival in England. So it was just after he won his optional race, and I was joining forums just to get our content out there and that, and joining groups. And the people were aware of this horse, and there was a lot of hype around this horse, and I think that was mainly due to the fact that there tends to be a lot more publicly available information, video and audio information of horses actually working on the gallops, and a lot of people really, before this horse had even won anything, they thought they'd seen something very special, didn't they?
Yeah, I remember. So it's interesting because here, and I don't know how it is in England, but here you can watch, like they have different groups that will record race workouts for the racehorses and stuff like that in the mornings. So
it just doesn't happen here. Not that I'm aware of. It just doesn't happen. I am of the opinion, like I said to you the other day, that if they could here, they would work their horses in secret. I really do think that, some of them. Godolphin they even built a private gallop at Newmarket.
Yeah, I've seen just like some pictures and some videos and stuff like that, but I've seen something about that. That's pretty unique. You don't have anything like that here, really. I mean,
exactly. So if horses even before they run, you've seen a lot of these horses work, and they work them individually, and they will tell you the name of the horse, and that you'll know which horse you are watching. Over here, they're working in groups of 30, and they'll all have the same blanket on. Unless you knew, do you know? So even after he'd won these 2 minor races in February and March, people were of the opinion that this was a decent horse, weren't they?
Yeah, and I don't know that people had really paid a lot of attention to him before his first race. It was really after that they started to pay attention to him and like watch him and stuff like that. But as soon as that race was over, he was just the talk of the town, and everybody started following his workouts, and everyone started trying to figure out what his next race was going to be and all that stuff. And I think it helps that his trainer, Bob Baffert, is one of the more accessible trainers. So he made it a lot easier to get information, and he was willing to share information and talk to reporters and talk to fans and stuff like that. So I think that helped a lot as well.
Yeah, and also it's worth touching on where he ended up going in down the Triple Crown route. Odds and his historical fact were very much stacked against this horse. Something to do with, I wasn't familiar with it, called The Curse of Apollo or something. So if you would just like to talk to the listeners about that quickly, please.
Yeah, so basically he was facing there was a lot of history against Justify. So the first one, and this is probably the one that was talked about the most, is that no horse since Apollo in something like 1882 had won the Kentucky Derby after not racing as a 2-year-old. So right off the bat, Justify was facing there was a lot of kind of opposition in his way, because it's difficult for a horse who starts that late, even in January, but as late as February in his case, it's hard for them to have the maturity and kind of the knowledge and all of that you need to have to be able to run well in a field of 20 horses, regardless of how talented you are. So that was one thing that was going against him. And then I think only one horse since Apollo had won the Kentucky Derby off of only 3 lifetime starts. And so both of those things were going against him, and just having the seasoning that he needed to be able to do what he did was very, very unlikely to happen in between, his maiden in February, the allowance race in March, and then the Santa Anita Derby.
Exactly. So he obviously had a following among the people, and there was obviously a lot of good horses that had ran as with juveniles in better form. And I thought really that Connections, you can normally tell if Connections have faith in a horse, they just go for it, don't they? So when they put the horse in the Santa Anita Derby at the beginning of April, which is a Group 1 in itself, they didn't bother going up the pattern. They weren't looking for a Group 3 for it or a Group 2, were they? They knew what they had.
What they wanted. I remember reading an article after his I want to say it was after his maiden race, and by that point, Bob Baffert, his trainer, and his owners had already mapped out a pathway for him to get to the Kentucky Derby just from his maiden. And it changed a little bit as horses got hurt and came off the Kentucky Derby trail and stuff like that. But they, from the get-go, knew exactly what they wanted, knew exactly what they were going to do with him, and they had planned how they were going to get him to the Derby in May.
Yeah, and it's worth saying that it is a lot easier to do that than it is to get a horse available to run in the English Classics, because in America they do something which is also quite novel compared to me as an English. They actually encourage their horses to run in America with something called the Road to the Kentucky Derby. Certain races will have a certain amount of points to get in the race, and the top 20 who finish will get in the race. So with the Santa Anita Derby being a 100-point race, they knew, really, it was win or bust that day. That was the day he had to win, wasn't it, really? Because if he didn't win that day, it was all over, weren't it?
Yeah, so if he had even finished second, he wouldn't have had enough points to make it into the field. So it was basically all or nothing at that point, and they knew they had a good shot. I mean, obviously, he was a super talented horse, and he was very just kind of mature for where he should have been, and he was just big, and they had a lot of faith in him. But he actually faced a pretty tough field that day. So he faced Bolt d'Oro, who was one of the favorites for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile the previous year, and he actually at one point had been the favorite for the Derby. And he faced another horse who finished third. His name was Core Beliefs, who, granted, he's not on the same level, but he just won a Grade 2 in the Ohio Derby a couple weeks ago. So he's no slouch either. And so it was a pretty tough field that they were going up against for his third start and even his first stakes race altogether. But obviously they had an idea of what they had because they didn't back down. I mean, he went in as a favorite. So even that's just the amount of buzz that this horse had created around himself, just in his workouts and in his races and stuff like that. People had so much faith in him that he was favored ahead of Bolt Doro, who at one point had been the favorite for the Derby.
Yeah, I mean, Bolt Doro was the odds-on favourite in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, which obviously is 4 minutes south as a juvenile. He was beaten that day by a horse we'll talk about later on in the podcast. But yeah, that goes to show that it was a good race. But Bolt Doro, I felt, really the race that took it all out of him was when he was the race with McKinsey.
Yeah. I forget, was it the same?
That was a real tough race, and it was hard out, straight away, all to the line, and they were both flat out. McKinsey has injured him. It finished McKinsey for the season, that race. So for people to really expect Bolt Doro to do anything after that, I think was a bit stretching it a bit. But he was certainly a good, solid opponent to beat in the Santa Anita Derby. And regarding what you touched on, they had the Arkansas Derby 2 or 3 weeks later, didn't they? Do you think really, if they'd have got beat in the Santa Anita Derby, they'd have run in that?
So I think the Arkansas Derby was actually just 1 week later, and I think the intention actually...
Yeah, possibly, yeah. Close, wasn't it? But that was the only other chance they had, wasn't it?
Yeah, so realistically, I think the Lexington Stakes was 2 weeks.
Yeah, 30 points only that was, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, so they could have gone there. Originally the plan was to have Justify go to the Arkansas Derby, but then when McKinsey, who was also trained by Bob Baffert, got hurt, he got pulled out of the Santa Anita Derby. They put him in. But realistically, just knowing Bob Baffert and the way he trains, and he doesn't really like to, rush horses into races like that. So he wouldn't have, I don't think, wanted to have gone from the Santa Anita Derby to the Lexington Stakes and then 2 weeks later to the Kentucky Derby. I don't really think that would have been his style. So it was going to be either all or nothing at that point.
So he went to Santa Anita, and it was the perfect opportunity for him, really, because he liked the track. He'd won both his previous races there before. Mm-hmm. So he went there really with a lot in his favour, didn't he?
Yeah, it was really kind of probably a perfect scenario in his situation, because even though there were a lot of new things for him, so it was a much bigger day, there were a lot more fans, it was a much harder race, all of that kind of stuff, there was way more pressure. It was still kind of his home track. It's where he had been based out of since January. So it was still somewhere that he was comfortable, where he could get that kind of exposure and experience before going to the Derby. So I think it was a really good move. On his whole team. It was a good move on their part to kind of keep him there and let him kind of experience it at home before he made the trip to the Derby and faced that whole, the Derby is just a whole nother thing in itself, with the number of people that are there and the amount of noise and the things that are going on. It's just a completely different atmosphere. So I think letting him kind of take that on a much smaller scale, but being at home, made a big difference.
For the Grade $1 million Santa Anita Derby. Racing! Jimmy Chila fast into stride with Bolt Doro. Pepe Tonio, Justify is off smoothly. It's Justify moving into a narrow lead. Core Beliefs is going to follow him across. At the judges the first time, and Justify the leader by 1 length. He's staying off the rail. Bolt Doro, plenty of room on his inside as a joint second with Core Beliefs. Then Pepe Tonio outside Jimmy Chila from Instilled Regard. And Orbit Rain last with 7/8 left to go. Justify taking the baton for Team Baffert, leads them around the first turn in the Santa Anita Derby, getting away by 2.5 lengths from Bolt Doro. Then comes Jimmy Chila, the inside of Core Beliefs. Pepe Tonio, 5th, 7 off the leader. Instilled Regard back at the tail of the field, in company with the maiden Orbit Rain. As they run along past the 5/8 pole, and Justify by 3 lengths, allowed to stride out. He leads clearly from Bolt Doro in the middle stages. In third position is Jimmy Chila. Then Core Beliefs, followed by Pepe Tonio. Orbit Rain on the outside of Instilled Regard, half a mile from home, and Justify by 2 1/4 lengths. Bolt Doro coming a little closer to him going into the far turn. The key protagonists are being afforded every opportunity. Around the far turn in the Santa Anita Derby is Prodigious Talent. Matches Established Class. It's Justified by 1 1/4. Bolt Doro taking a run at him, but really having to be pushed on by Castellano. Smith looks confident on Justify reaching the top of the stretch. Back in third is Core Beliefs, then Instilled Regard, Pepe Tonio. Justify leading past the 8th pole. He's a couple of lengths in front. Bolt Doro is closing on the inside. It's Justified by 3/4 of a length. Bolt Doro trying ever so hard, but Justify, another exhilarating exhibition by the supremely gifted athlete. He's on a dizzying ascent to greatness, winning the Santa Anita Derby clearly from Bolt Doro, followed in by Core Beliefs and Instilled Regard.
I was kind of seeing if you turn off a little bit, but when I asked him how hard it would take me to get him going again, is it going to be something I really need to work on and maybe not let him off the bridle too much? But he's very athletic. You know, it doesn't take much to get him right back on it. It's just a matter of squeezing your reins and tapping him on the shoulder, and he was right back to business.
I mean, as highly as he was regarded from a trainer who's won the Triple Crown, Bob Baffert, above expectations?
Yeah, he's above average, way above. He's way above average. He's just very, very special, and I'm glad I get to keep the weight on him.
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you.
So the Santa Anita Derby in the bag. It was kind of job done then, and all roads then led to Kentucky for the Kentucky Derby. I mean, most people who are listening really to this show, Elizabeth, will probably not be from America. In some of the shows, they'll be thinking, what? Why are all these big races in Kentucky? But Kentucky really is the heart of American racing, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's where most of the breeding, or at least most of the the expensive and high class breeding kind of takes place. And it has something to do with the limestone in the ground. It fortifies the grass in some way that helps, basically as foals, it helps them grow really strong. So it became kind of the heart of a thoroughbred racing. And so that's where you have some of the biggest tracks in America. So you have Churchill Downs is there, which is where the Kentucky Derby is held. Keeneland, which is a pretty big track, also in Kentucky. And they have like all of the major sales for all the breeding stock. And they have a lot of like racing sales and stuff like that go on there too. So it really is the heart of American racing. But most of the prep races for the Derby come outside of Kentucky, so California, Florida, New York, that kind of thing.
Yeah, they all have their trials, and that's why the road exists really. And the road is also it's there to improve. One thing I was looking at is that they are looking to at least pretend to give the illusion of making foreign horses welcome in the race. At least they're sort of on an exoteric level saying, yeah, we'll create a few races for you to win. I noticed there was a Japanese horse that won a couple of Japanese races, but he never turned up, did he, on the day? But it was a high quality field, and also 20 runners. One thing you will get in the Kentucky Derby, guaranteed every year, due to the way that it is structured, is you will never get less than 20 runners, will you?
No, so they actually changed the rules a couple of years ago, where it used to be just the 20 were able to be entered in the race, the 20 that qualified, and they changed the rules a couple of years ago so that now you have also eligible horses. So if one horse gets hurt coming up to the race and has to scratch, one of the also eligibles can get in. And I think it's done a lot just in terms of the hype for the Derby. I mean, it's already, in the U.S., it's one of the most watched sporting events in the country. And even among people who don't follow racing, it's a huge event. But I think the fact that there's 20 horses, it just adds to the excitement and adds to the appeal for both the bettors and just, casual Kentucky Derby fans. I think the 20 horse race is really one of the big appeals about it, because it makes everything so much more unpredictable than, if there's like 6, 7, 8, 9 horses in the field.
Absolutely. And it really is if anybody out there has not seen this race, any race, I'm not just on about this year's version of the race, any incarnation of the race, just watch it. It is incredible. You'll never see a horse race like it, I don't think, anywhere else in the world. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is open to interpretation. But it really is a massive event. The fans as well. I was looking at some of the attendances of these races. 80,000 people go to these events, and you only get, that's an incredible attendance.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple of years they've had 100,000 maybe, and I think they might have had to put a cap on it. But yeah, I mean, really, they've made the event. I mean, obviously it's a horse racing event, but they've really made the event about the experience, regardless of whether or not you actually are invested in horse racing or care about the horses at all. They've made it a big event just to attend. So you have a lot of celebrities that go. There's a giant party that happens in the infield of the track. So it really is like, it's a horse racing event first and foremost, but a lot of people that go, they are just there to say that they're there, and they're there for the experience, and they're there, just to be there. So they've really kind of sold it that way. And so it's become just this massive event. Pretty much all of the Derby race or all of the Triple Crown races are that way.
Yeah, and they all come so quickly as well. It's worth pointing out that Churchill Downs race was the 5th of May. The next race was only a fortnight after that. And then another fortnight after that is the third leg. They don't hang about over there. Over here we'll have the Guineas will be in May, and the St Leger is in September. Plenty of time. So they like to. It's quite intensive for a 3-year-old, the pattern. So we did notice that. So we get to the actual day of the race, 20 runners, and you'd have to say really that Justify went there. The most unexposed horse in the lineup. I have no doubt about that. All the other horses, you could look at the form and say, oh yeah, this horse here, you can say what he's going to do. He's pretty much, that's his level. But Justify, you're talking about a horse here that was still only having his 4th run and was still unbeaten. You just did not know really at the time how good the horse was. Did you still at that stage?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could tell that he was a talented horse, but with everything going against him and with how little racing he had, there was really no telling what he was going to do. And even, as good as he was and as good as people thought he could be, there was no way to know how he would handle the crowds, how he would handle the pressure, how he would handle everything like that. So, yeah, there was a lot of unknowns, but people had a lot of faith in him. And I mean, rightly so. He is just an unbelievably talented horse and just physically just an unbelievable specimen. Yeah, but I think there were a lot of questions, but I think a lot of people kind of just thought that he was good enough to overcome everything that was in his way.
The track is real soft. They just bounced around, he bounced around there pretty well, was happy. So, it's a good first day, so that's what we're all looking for.
How quickly did you think you had something special in him? What stood out?
Well, I mean, we were working him. He was showing us. He was tipping soft in the mornings, and first time I worked him at Santa Anita, doing around there, pretty impressive, doing it really easy. And then we worked him from the gate a couple times, and we knew he would win his first out. And until he won his first out, the way he did was pretty impressive. And so in his second out, we thought, but he's always been one of those. He's always been a superior animal, and so when they're that big and beautiful, and then they can run, and the way he's bred, so I mean, all the ingredients are there. Now we just need some racing luck.
Is there more pressure when you have a horse like that, even though?
You know what? I'm not used to having pressure like this, so I don't know. After American Pharoah, everything's pretty easy from here on out.
You know what you mean, pressure like this?
No, to me the pressure it'll be more on Mike Smith. That's where the pressure. I mean, if I was riding him, I'd feel a lot of pressure. But that's something that's racing. So you need racing luck. I've led the best horses up here before and got beat. So you just have to. I always expect the horse. Hope for the best attitude, and you don't go nuts. You don't go crazy that way, because you just have to. I feel we have a good enough horse that could win it, but it's a very competitive race. The most competitive race. I was watching those horses training up there, Newman, both the road. They're just incredible horses. They're tough, and so you cannot make a mistake. I think there's a lot of parity. So. But we're here with a few outs because we know we have a superior racehorse.
And it's worth touching on now really as well, just what a big deal this race is for the breeders of horses as well. because you had all the big players of the breeding game were there, weren't they? Apart from, say, Shadwell, who don't really seem to have that many horses in America. I've seen a couple, but they don't seem to be running at a very high level. The old Hamdan horses out there. But you had Godolphin, were represented with Enticed, who I actually thought had a good chance personally. But has he run since Enticed?
I don't think so. I think he skipped the rest of the Triple Crown, and I don't think he's been seen since. An uncommon thing for a lot of horses in the Derby, because it's there's so much pressure trying to get to the Derby that a lot of times the pressure will get to the horse, and they will run the horse more than they should, or the horse just ends up super tired, and you can actually see that in the case of Audible. The horse, he finished third in the Derby. He missed second by a nose, and he hasn't run since. And he was actually originally going to be appointed at the Belmont, and he was just so tired. He lost so much weight that he never ran again. They took him, to be evaluated by a vet, and he ended up just needing a lot of time off because he just couldn't handle the stress of going all the way through the Triple Crown Trail and then running in more than just the Derby.
Yeah, I mean, I've looked at the breeding of Enticed. I think that's a good horse. I see it win. What race did it see it win? The Gotham Stakes, I think it won. It won that easy. And I've looked at it. I think personally it could turn up in the Dubai World Cup next year, I think.
Yeah, and I like the fact that his connections aren't afraid to kind of put their horse out there. Like, they're not trying to say, oh, well, we want our horse to win all the races, so they only go towards the easy spots or they duck other horses. They have faith in their horse, and so they're willing to put him in tough spots, and I really appreciate that about them. And I think he's a better horse than he showed in the Derby. I mean, he did win the Wood Memorial, I think, if I remember correctly.
He didn't. He was much to my cost, he was stuffed in that race by Vino Rosso.
That's right, but he did run a good race, and there was a lot of fun.
Yeah, he won the Gotham last year, and if you look at what won this year's Dubai World Cup, Thunder Snow actually ran in last year's Kentucky Derby.
I think running is a strong word. He, bucked.
Yeah, well, he was there. He actually bolted at the start, but he was actually there to run on the day. Just didn't fancy it on the day. So it's a race that Godolphin have used in the past for that race, and I think I wouldn't rule old Enticed out of anything just yet. But obviously there was other horses on the day. We touched on, there was Judgmont, represented by another unexposed horse on the day, Hofberg. He's obviously best days are ahead of him to come. And then obviously Coolmore had sent Mendelssohn. And it's worth touching on Mendelssohn as well, because this was a horse that polarised opinion in America, wasn't it? Because he won what was always a weak race in the United Arab Emirates. That was never in dispute. Mm-hmm. But he obviously went there, and you look at the breeding of the horse Mendelssohn, he's actually bred as a brother to a sire of a horse already in America called Into Mischief, mm-hmm. and a dam called Beholder, a very good mare called Beholder. So the breeding of that horse was there to win that race on the day, wasn't it? So that he was deemed on the day a massive threat to Justify, wasn't he?
Yeah, and I think the fact that the UAE Derby was his first race on the dirt, and I think, as you touched on his breeding with Beholder and Into Mischief, like, Beholder is one of probably the greatest race mares that has ever run in America. She was a champion at like 2, 3, 4, and 6 or something like that in the year-end Eclipse Awards. She was just an unbelievable race mare, and her brother Into Mischief, he was a grade 1 winner. So to have this horse run on the dirt for the first time, and granted the race was really weak and he had everything go his way, but he won by 18 and a half lengths or something absurd like that, just completely ran the field off their feet, set the track record. And so I think a lot of people were just we're so much in awe just of that performance and the potential that a horse with that kind of breeding could have. And to be honest, I was one of them. I think he's a super talented horse. I know he's planning on coming back to the Breeders' Cup, and I'm really excited to see him run. There was a lot of, but then on the other hand, you had people that were saying, no horse has ever come in from Dubai who's ever won the Derby. No horse from Dubai, I don't think, has even ever hit the board. There was a lot of criticism of his trainer for like the path that he took to get from Dubai to the US, where he only came something like 2 days before the race, which, I think his trainer knows way more than I do. So I wasn't going to judge him for that. But there were a lot of people that had questions about that and questions about his ability to get Mendelssohn ready for the Derby. And then, of course, as soon as the gates opened, he was just completely body slammed. The track was a mess. He lost all shot. So he didn't run well. I don't think it was a fair evaluation of his talent or his ability to race in the U.S. or race on the dirt by any stretch. But he was a really interesting horse to follow coming in because there weren't a lot of people who were neutral about him. They either really liked his chances or they really didn't think he had a shot. And it was interesting to watch those discussions go around as the race was coming up.
Yeah, it was, and I thought so. I had to look there while you were talking. That's why I went a bit quiet because I thought I was dreaming there, or I was living in a parallel universe. But he actually did. I knew he did all along. He actually did run on the all weather, we call it over here. I don't know whether dirt and all weather is the same thing. They actually created a race for him in Dundalk in Ireland in early March before the UAE as well, and he won that as well. So he actually raced in March, and then he went to the UAE, and then he went to Kentucky. So are they still going to keep? Because it's always also worth remembering that this horse won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf as well. So the horse is, I think, versatile regarding surface. You can't say this horse is a dirt horse because it's won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know what they're doing really with him. I mean, why have they not brought him back and campaigned him in Europe? I think since Kentucky, you said the trainer knows more than us. Obviously he does, yeah, but that doesn't stop us having opinions on him. I think he's lost the plot with the horse. I don't think he knows what he's doing with it because there's loads of races he could be running in over here. I don't know what he's doing with the horse. I can't work it out. Is the horse? Where is the horse? I've not seen it entered in any races. If he's being campaigned for an American campaign, why is he not being trained in America? Or why is he not at least running over here? And then there will be probably 10 or 15 Ballydoyle horses that end up in the Breeders' Cup, won't there? This year, we both know that, and they'll have all been campaigned in Europe all summer. So what are they doing with this one? I just can't work it out what they're doing with him. Can't work it out.
He did run in the U.S. I want to say just a couple of weeks ago. I want to say he was in the Dwyer and he finished third. Although in his defense, it was kind of an interesting race where like a long shot won, and it was his first race since the Derby, and there was just kind of a lot of things going against him. It was kind of probably a shorter race than he would want to run. So it was not a bad performance. It was not what some people were hoping for. But he did run in the U.S. I think they're pointing towards the Breeders' Cup, and I don't know if they just want to get him, they don't want to have to ship him all the way back to Europe to bring him all the way back here, if that's why they stayed over here, or if they are ultimately hoping or thinking that maybe he'll have better breeding opportunities with his siblings in the U.S. Maybe they're focused on that. I don't really know the logic behind the course of action, but it is kind of exciting just as an American fan that he's going to be running here, at least for the time being.
Oh, fair play. I have to hold my hands up there because I didn't even know he'd had that run in that American race. That's the trouble with these American races. There's so many of them. They sneaked one in. They sneaked one in past me as well earlier in the week, earlier this month as well, called Athena. That one out there, won a Group 1 out there, didn't it? Athena. Cool Wars. I didn't know that one was running either. So it finished third, did it? And Mendelssohn was beaten again, was he?
Yeah, so the horse that beat him actually ran in the Derby also. His name was Frenzy Fire.
Which one? Frenzy Fire beat Mendelssohn? You wouldn't have thought that, would you? Yeah, that was another one. That was another one that I thought was a better juvenile than Group 1 winning juvenile, wasn't he? So I thought his best days were behind him as well, to be fair. So that beat Mendelssohn, did he? That's incredible.
I think it helped him the turn back. I mean, it was a shorter race. It was either a mile or 7/8 of a mile or something like that. So the turn back in distance, I think, really helped him. I don't know that he ever really wanted to go run in the longer races that he run in the Derby and the preps for the Derby and stuff like that. So I think it really benefited Firenze Fire to cut back in distance, but I think it hurt Mendelssohn.
Did Ryan Moore go out to ride him? Who rode Mendelssohn?
I think it was Ryan Moore, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong, though. I'm not positive.
Probably, you'd think they'd send their best jockey out there to ride him. That's a blow for them without any shadow of a doubt. So obviously, back to the Kentucky Derby now. There was obviously other horses that had won the trials, like Magnum Moon, who won. He looked quite an impressive winner of a trial, but then again, you just knew that front running style of his weren't gonna cut any mustard around there, and so it proved. And so with the Kentucky Derby on the horizon, how confident were people talking about the Triple Crown then, even before the Kentucky Derby in America? Or were people really still just focusing on the Derby itself?
I think there was a mixture of both. So Las Vegas in the U.S. is kind of the center for gambling. And I think after the Santa Anita Derby, they had Justify's odds at winning the Triple Crown as something like 9-1. And this horse basically was going up against every rule of history in the sport of racing to get to the Kentucky Derby. And people thought that highly of him that they had him at 9-1 to win the Triple Crown. And then there were other people who just thought that was absolutely absurd and that the horse had no shot in the Derby. But I think a lot of people really had faith in him specifically for the Derby. I don't know about like all of the races after that. I think most people just focused on the Derby, but there was a lot of buzz around him and questions about whether or not he was good enough to win the Triple Crown.
They're in the gate. And they're off in the Kentucky Derby. And promises fulfilled. Great start. Flawless as well for Justify coming out of the gate. Both girls flashing speed on the outside, and so is Noble Indy. And Good Magic is not far behind either. Beneath the iconic Twin Spires for the first time. Promises fulfilled out to set the pace. Justify is right there racing in second. Good Magic in behind while third. Both girls racing in fourth. Flameway on the inside in fifth. Firenze Fire moves up to be sixth. Noble Indy is seventh. Mendelssohn is off the pace today racing in eighth. Free Drop Billy down inside ninth. Audible pushed along in 10th. Bravazzo is 11th. Entice is running along in 12th. Combatant is wide on the first turn in 13th. Magna Moon is 14th. Lone Sailor is 15th. Hoffberg is at the back of the pack racing in 16th by 3. Then we come back to Instilled Regard and Vino Rosso. 5 or 6 more back to My Boy Jack. Solimini is the last of them all. A brutal half mile in the slop in 45 and 3/5 seconds. And just like that, Justify seizes the lead with a half mile to go in the Kentucky Derby. Promises fulfilled, trying to keep up second and inside. Flameaway is not far behind, racing third. Bolt Girls 3 wide of the far turn in fourth. Firenze fired on inside fifth. Champion Good Magic moves up one spot while wide on the far turn. Farther back, Bravazzo starting to muster up a rally. Going past Noble Indy. Audible starting to pick it up with 3 furlongs to go. Instilled Regards finding his best stride as well. So is Vino Rosso on the far outside as they race for the top of the stretch with Justify the one to catch. Here comes Good Magic on the outside for the final quarter mile. Justify turns for home in front. Good Magic in a full-out drive with 3/16 to go. But Justify and Mike Smith are digging down on a 2-length lead. Good Magic is wandering about the track from far behind. Audible rallies to be third. They're coming to the final 16th, and it's Justify and Good Magic and Audible. Justify in a 2-length lead. Final try from Good Magic. All rise for Justify. The Kentucky Derby was never in doubt. Wins by 2.5. It's tight for second between Good Magic and Audible. Instilled Regard was fourth.
You get your second Derby win, and in doing so, you break a 136-year-old streak that says a horse that didn't race at 2 can't win the Derby. How special is Justify?
First of all, I want to thank my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, for this blessing us on this afternoon and blessing us with this amazing horse. It'll take a horse like him to break that curse, and wow, he's just something else. I can't describe how special this horse is. My vocabulary don't have the words for it.
You've been on him for 3 of his 4 starts. Can you just say what it is about him that makes him so special, other than that he beats everyone?
He's got that it factor. He's just so above average, you know. He's got unbelievable talent, and then he's got a mind to go with it. He was loving this stuff. He's crazy for such a young horse. He's just so big and talented.
Congratulations, Mike. Let's go to Kenny Rice.
Hello, and that was, if you've just tuned in, that was the Kentucky Derby, believe it or not, here on Reprieve Media CIC. That was won by Justify. You've actually stumbled across a look back on the racing career of one of the leading American 3-year-old racehorses this year, called Justify. We're it's fair to say me and my co-host Elizabeth Pepper are halfway through now. Elizabeth, are you still with us?
I'm right here.
Superb work. So people will have gathered by then if they understood what they were listening to. The weather there, really, we have to touch on the weather of the day of the Kentucky Derby. I do not think I have, in all my years of racing, well, I tell a lie, I was going to say that, but I have to correct myself before I spoke, because I remember I backed a horse in France this year in the snow, called Air Pilot. It won a Group 3 at St. Cloud, and the racing was that bad. When things are in your way and in your favour, that things aligned correctly. And it was one of the first articles we did on Double Amford. I was up all night writing it, and I thought, this was going to win. Why not? I write it. The weather was that bad. It was the second race on the card. Air Pilot sauntered home in the snow, and then they called the rest of the card off.
Oh, wow.
So that's it. Another half hour, and our Air Pilot would have needed I don't know, whatever they used in the snow. What's it called? A husky to get down the track.
Yeah.
But in the Kentucky Derby, when you say dirt tracks in America, they're nothing like the artificial man-made synthetic surfaces that we have here in England, that we call all-weather artificial racing. We are talking, when we say dirt in America, we are talking dirt that you plant flowers in, aren't we? Gardens. Racing on gardens, aren't they?
Yeah, it's very much of like a sand kind of base. So it's like a mixture of sand and dirt. So I don't know. I know a little bit about the all-weather track. I don't know a whole lot about it. But I know it drains differently. Like the dirt drains differently from the all-weather track and definitely from the turf. I know when it gets wet, it handles a little bit differently. And yeah, the track that day was just an absolute nightmare. I think they said it was the wettest Kentucky Derby in history. They had so much rain. It had rained the whole week and just poured the entire day. So there are some pictures of some of the horses, and the mud goes all the way up to their fetlocks. And they were just sinking. It was awful.
It was. But it was the same for all the horses. And Justify managed to win the race. Whether you can say convincingly and conclusively in them conditions that the best horse won that race, well, I don't think you can.
I think it's kind of a toss-up. There were definitely horses that didn't run their race that day, and that definitely would have run better. I'm curious. It's hard to say because his career was so short. You can only judge it by what he ran against in the races that he ran, and he did win all the races. So it's hard for me to say definitively that another horse might have beaten him. But at the same time, some of the best horses in that race weren't able to run the kind of races that they might have run on a dry track with less mud and less slippery conditions and stuff like that. So I think it's a hard question to answer, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not taking nothing away from the horse. I mean, it was a good performance. He like the jockey, we touch on the jockey, Mike Smith, gave him a great ride. He knew that in them conditions, the best place to be was out in front. Because obviously, like you said, you don't want to, you're racing through puddles of horses, kicking all sorts of stuff in your face. So he gave him a great ride, didn't he? And I thought, to be honest, he laboured home in the end and just looked like he needed a little bit further that day. You could tell that he was progressing more. He was showing more of an all-round. To me, the winner, the first early trials for really, you can class them as late 2-year-old races. But you could tell that this horse, a lot of them, you see, when you get to the Kentucky Derby, you're on the downslope already. I will maintain that. And if you look at the form, I think it backs up what I say. When you look at horses like Bolt Doro and others that had lined up that day, you could say that they'd run their best races to get there. But this horse, Justify, you could tell that he was still a baby compared to all them. He still looked quite green that day, I think.
Yeah, well, I think he was just, there's a lot going on, and it's hard for a horse who's only running a few races to really be mature enough to handle it. So the fact that he was able to really run as well as he did is just so impressive. But to touch on your point about horses being kind of on the downward spiral by the time they get to the Derby, you're absolutely right. There's so much pressure to get to the Derby, and people spend so much of their time and focus on just how to get to the Derby and running like peak races all the way, through their 2-year-old campaign and then through the beginning of the 3-year-old campaign. There's just nothing left to give. So you're absolutely right about a lot of horses being past their best performances by the time they actually run in Kentucky.
Well, it's one of the first things I noticed, because the only time I used to follow the American racing is in the Breeders' Cup, and even then I was just used to back the European horses. I remember Raven's Pass was always one I'll never forget. I honestly thought that stood an outstanding chance in the Breeders' Cup, and I was proved correct. And no one in America fancied him that day. He drifted like a barge in the market, and I was thinking, wow, what's going on here? But he still won. I thought it was fantastic. I really did like that. And but other ones that I fancied, and the reverse has happened, where I thought they'd gone there and they've been absolutely bomb-proof, and I thought they're absolute certainty to win. But American racing to me is still, I'm learning every time I look at a race out there. And I will look at one Group 1 and look at one Group 1, and they mean the same to me. I will not equate between them. So when I was looking at all the races for the pattern races, I was thinking a lot of these horses have already been beaten in group races. It's hard for me to fancy him to win a group race anyway. So that was why and then Justify, I thought, well, he needs to prove it to me that he can do it. And by the time he proved he could do it, he was so short in the market. And the other horses that were there to take him on as 3-year-olds just knew, I think, let's just, if we be a bit discreet here, we'll just wait for Group 1 at the end of the season. It means the same. It doesn't matter where you win your Group 1, But horses, I think, like Hofburg, for instance, I think we'll win a Group 1 out there. I've got no doubt about that. But connections are not in as much of a rush. Whereas with Justify, you got the impression that it was fill your boots while the going is good sort of thing. They knew what they had for that short period of time, and I think a lot of the other trainers did as well.
And I think it's hard to say that he would have, fizzled out after the Triple Crown. I mean, obviously he did get hurt, and we'll never know. But a part of me honestly thinks that he was really just so impressed of the horses this year. He really did have everything going against him, and just to see him and because we can watch the workouts and stuff like that here in America, being able to watch him do progress from the Derby to the Preakness to the Belmont. He really had his first really tough race in the Preakness, and to see him go, from that to really being able to win the Belmont, I really think he would have continued to progress after that. I think he might have just been I think at least for the period of the Triple Crown, he was just so much farther ahead of the other horse in his crop that I think he would have continued to do well. I don't know, but it's hard. It's obviously hard to say, and it obviously took his toll because now he's retired. But yeah.
Oh yeah, without any shadow of a doubt, he proved in the end, I think, to be head and shoulders above all them other 3-year-olds that he raced. But against the older horses, we'll never know, like you correctly say. And I think I will stand by my opinions until I think he'd have soon found him out. The older horses, personally, we'll never know. But that's what's brilliant about this sport. There's always more questions unanswered than there is answered in this sport. You'll never have all the answers. So you touched on it there briefly. Sorry, the Preakness at a place I've never heard of called Pimlico. Where on earth is that?
That is in Baltimore, Maryland. It's actually the state that I grew up in.
It's Maryland, is it? That explains quite a lot then. Okay.
The race is actually it's not as big as the Derby, because most people will follow the Derby just to see who wins the Derby. And then if a Triple Crown is on the line, they'll watch the Belmont. So the Preakness a lot of times gets lost in the shuffle.
And it's only 7 furlongs, isn't it? 7.5 furlongs, I think, wasn't it?
No, it's a mile and 3/16. So it's
the same distance as the Kentucky Derby, yeah.
It's a 1/16 of a mile shorter.
Yeah, I knew it was shorter. Yeah.
Yeah.
So really, I find that strange as well, because the natural thing you'd think to do with these horses as they progress in age is to up them up in trip. But that's what we do. That's what we do here. We have the Guineas over a mile, then we have 1 mile 4 furlongs, the Derby or the Oaks. And then 1 mile 6 furlongs, which American horses wouldn't even get that in a million years. They'd have to do the first half of it in the vehicle they got to the track in to get to 1 mile 1 mile 6. But They go 1 mile, 1.5 miles in the Belmont under duress, but you drop them down in trip in America. I think, what are they doing here? You know, and obviously with Justify looking so dominant, all the horses really headed to Pimlico, I think, playing for second place.
Can you just sort of talk about the race setup, like, you know, on paper and on
Nobody
paper,
knows.
and,
When it's money like that, nobody knows. You know, I see a horse like Quip. I think Wayne's horse, Sporting Chance. He's got a lot of, you know, I think Wayne's going to, he says he's going to be out there, so who knows. Just, we know we have a quick horse and he's fast. And, you know, the first quarter, it's going to be fast. It always is, especially when you have mud.
He told Aiden that if they don't break sharp, then you might as well just go straight to the parking lot.
I told him, I told him they were savages. These guys are savages on Derby Day with 20 horses.
Well, what would you say about the Preakness?
Oh, the Preakness, it's different. You know what? I think it's different. Everybody's trying to ride, they want to get a piece, and so it's a Derby is a completely different mindset. So here everybody wants to, they want to, they're trying to run first, second, or third. So it's not like they have to. I don't think anybody's going to be in a real big hurry. It's 20 horses. You have to be in a hurry to just stay out of danger.
Chad was talking about how it's extremely hard for a horse at this stage to just keep taking a step forward every race. I mean, do you agree with that? And do you think your horse even needs to take a step forward in this race?
I think he just stay the way he is. We don't. I mean, I can't. The way he ran really hard and fast. So, he just needs to. We're all sort of all in the same boat. We're coming back, and it's muddy, and so just the break's still so important. And, main thing is you have a good horse. That's what the main ingredient.
Are you more confident though with your horse, even in this condition?
I have a lot of confidence in him ever since we worked him the first time in Santa Anita. It was like he showed it what a gifted horse he was, and so we're just here again. And what he's done in a short period of time, and it takes a really special horse to do what he's done. So.
Well, when he worked that first time, did you think, gosh, I wish, the timing had been a little different, because you had to know how things had to really fall into place to get him where he is.
No, when he worked that one day, I thought, we have a shot. We have a shot. This could be, if we don't miss but you can't miss anything. So we just, and then when he broke his maid, I knew he was going to win that day. But he didn't win like the way I wanted him to win. He was sort of like with little rank, and then we took the blinkers off, and then Mike rode him in a wet track, and he likes wet track. I mean, he just for a big horse, you think but you don't want a drying out track, because this thing, that's when it's harder on him, so.
But from the first time he worked for you, you thought we could win.
We knew we had something special. We have a chance. And then when he broke his maiden, I thought, well, now I've got two really good horses. I have him and Mackenzie, 2 bullets. And we had Solomini, I got to throw him in there. And so, but I thought I had 2 really good horses. And then when Mackenzie got hurt, and that was like, well, it was like the backup horse is pretty good too. So, but they still have to prove themselves. He's like Farrell. They're superstars.
Did Farrell wow you like him early?
Oh yeah, Farrell was wow
right from the start.
Oh yeah.
Which one's further along at this point?
They're pretty, they're superstars, but Farrell had run as a 2-year-old, and they're different kind of horses, but they're both Farrell and him. What they have in common is that they're extremely fast. They both could win the Breeders' Cup Sprint and the Breeders' Cup Classic. They're just good horses, they're just really superior horses.
Bravazo, last one to load. In the gate. And they're off in the 143rd running of the Preakness, and a good break there for Justify. But Good Magic got the jump. Justify on the outside is Bravazo as they race through the foggy first furlong here at Old Hilltop. On the inside is Good Magic, but Justify going right to the front, just a neck in front. Bravazo third on the outside, and then followed by Quip, and then on the outside the two-path. As they move around that first turn is Diamond King. Diamond King's only about 3 or 4 lengths off the lead. Tenfold on the outside of that one. And back to Sporting Chances racing to the back of the pack with Lone Sailor, who trails the field. 23.11 posted for the opening quarter. And Justify on the outside has a head in front. But Good Magic testing him every step of the way in the opening stages. It's another 2 lengths. And the Calumet colors up. Bravazo racing in third. Quip down to the inside in fourth. Tenfold is fifth. And Diamond King is next in sixth. And still Sporting Chance in the back of the pack with Lone Sailor on the outside as they head now past the half in 47.19 seconds. 4 furlongs left to go. And it is Good Magic. Justify. They've matched strides virtually from the start as they round the far turn. 6 furlongs in 111.42, and they're kicking 4 or 5 lengths clear. They begin to quicken up now. Tenfold on the outside. In the meantime, down to the inside, Bravazo working a little bit harder as they move to the top of the stretch. Ahead in head battle. Looks like a showdown in the fog. It is Good Magic on the inside. Justify on the outside, even turns, and they're head-to-head into the stretch as they make the turn for home. And now Justify and Mike Smith trying to grab the lead. Justify begins to pull away. Justify is in front. Justify, and here's Tenfold on the outside. Bravazo, Justify, Bravazo, Tenfold. Then Good Magic and Lone Sailor followed by Sporting Chance, and Diamond King, and Quip was last to cross. Justify. It wasn't a jog through the Baltimore fog, but he got it won. He's flawless.
Yeah, and I think you actually saw a lot of the jockeys kind of rode that way. They knew, I mean, a lot of the jockeys just knew that their horses weren't going to be able to get by him if they tried to take him out, take the race out on the lead the way he does. If they tried to match him stride for stride from the start, they weren't going to be able to keep up. And so I think it's interesting because Good Magic, the horse that ran second in the Derby, his jockey basically just took it right to Justify from the get-go, and nobody was expecting that to happen. And he basically just pressed Justify all the way around the track. They ran stride for stride pretty much until they came off the final turn. And it's interesting because his jockey has gotten a lot of heat for the way he ran the race. It took Good Magic out of his game.
Rightfully so.
Well,
Rightfully
I
so,
think,
in my opinion.
I don't know that it was the right decision, but I don't know that he had a better decision. I think if you let Justify lope along on an easy lead, I don't think anyone's getting by him. So I don't know that it was the right decision, but I do admire the jockey's willingness to try something new and at least try to make a race out of it and do what he thought would give his horse the best chance to win.
That is all well and good, but like I was saying at the time, it's not his decision. I watched the horse a few times. We're talking about a horse here, Good Magic, that's probably quite unfamiliar to a lot of listeners who are listening. It's an American horse. It's actually won the Breeders' Cup juvenile on its breaking its maiden in the Breeders' Cup. So, and then it won did it win the Bluegrass?
Yep.
Yes, it did. Won the Bluegrass Stakes, which is a sort of a trial for the Derby. So he had enough points easily in the bag from winning the Breeders' Cup and the Bluegrass to not even really worry about anything else. So Justify was really having to win. Good Magic was not, he was pretty always certain of a run, I think, Good Magic, once he won the Breeders' Cup. So, and then you watched him in the Kentucky Derby, and this horse, in the Breeders' Cup and the Bluegrass, the horse needs to come off the pace and finish quickly. That was obvious to even me. And I've never sat on the horse. I've never trained a racehorse. So when I watched his run in the Preakness, I would be amazed if the trainer of that horse told that jockey to ride the horse like that. And that is why the jockey is getting the stick, because he's actually disobeying the orders of the hierarchy. The owner, the trainer, and the jockey. The jockey has to ride the horse how the trainer tells him to ride. If If you get trainers in England like John Gosden, they'll say, "I'd ride the horse how you like. I've never ridden a horse. I train them. You ride it how you want." There are others, and they will be meticulous. They will say, "Look, I want you to hold your horse up until it gets to here, and then I want you to come through and go right at the end. And even if you get there 100 yards before I want you to, and you win, I'm still going to have a go at you because you've not ridden the horse like I wanted you to ride it." And I think that is why he's getting stick for that, because I think personally that he just totally disobeyed what he was told in the race before the race. He just did what he liked, and it could be argued he compromised his own horse's chances of winning the race. Absolutely clueless piece of riding.
Chad Brown, the trainer, did basically say that was not ever in his game plan. He was very upset that it did happen. I don't know that it was the right choice. I mean, obviously the horse didn't win. He finished fourth. He faded a little bit down the stretch and horses passed him right at the end. But I do admire the fact that the jockey was willing to try to make a race out of it and, try to take the race to Justify. None of the other jockeys were willing to do that. So the fact that he was willing to try is something that I can appreciate.
Okay, well, if you were a racehorse owner, I think you'd feel, I'm not that I am, but if I told a jockey to ride a horse one way and he rode it different to me, I'd never let him ride one of my horses again.
Oh, yeah.
Would you? Personally?
I agree. But as a fan...
And that's the problem with this. That's the problem. That is the problem. He sacrificed... If he'd have ridden a normal race, he'd have been second all day long, Good Magic, wouldn't he? I think we both agree there. So he's basically compromised second to finish fourth in the race. I don't know what he was doing.
Yeah.
I don't know who the owners of Good Magic are. I don't know if they're rich people. But I would imagine the difference between finishing fourth in a Grade 1 and second in a Grade 1 is probably a good $200,000 or $300,000. So that jockey has essentially cost them that just with his ego. Awful. Absolutely shameful. Well, that's just how I feel about it. I couldn't believe it. It would never happen over here. That jockey would never ride again in this country because none of the other trainers would have him because he's not going to do what I want him to do. Can't rely on him, can't trust him.
And I agree, as a trainer or an owner or something like that, I would be very upset. But as a fan who has no investment in these horses, I appreciate the fact that he was willing to take the horse out of his game to try to win. As an owner, trainer, what have you, I would have been absolutely furious. But it was nice to see someone who was willing to try to take the race to Justify, because there's no one who was going to beat him if he had an easy lead. And even just from a fan's perspective,
no one was going to beat him anyway, Elizabeth. Whatever the jockey did, no one was going to beat him anyway. He should have done what he was told.
Nice as a fan to see, it made Justify face some adversity. It made him run a little harder. He was tired at the end. There's no question. And just to see him keep going and kind of overcome that, as a fan, I appreciate it. As a jockey or as an owner or trainer, I would have absolutely been livid. But as a fan, just watching the race, it was something that I could appreciate.
It's because, do you think it was because it was a swerve? You didn't expect it, and that what was made it more memorable for you because you didn't expect it, maybe?
Well, I definitely didn't expect it, but I think it was just the fact that, a lot of times when American Pharoah won the Triple Crown in 2015, for example, he ran the Belmont, and a lot of people, once the race was over, just said, well, of course he won the race. It was handed to him. Nobody was willing to go with him early. He just sloped along on easy fractions, and he just kept going. And if someone had taken the race to him early, it would have been different. I don't think anyone can say that about the Preakness. It was super foggy. The track was, again, just like the Derby, a complete mess. And he was basically pressed every step of the way. So I think, in my opinion,
if you say so, I didn't see much of it.
Yeah, nobody could see anything. But as a fan, it kind of cut a lot of those people. It kind of made a lot of those people, they couldn't discount what he did in that race because he didn't have an easy lead. He was pressed the whole way. He was tired at the end, and he still won. I think people appreciate what he had done a little bit more.
Absolutely, and you have to say as well that he actually showed a great attitude. The horse. One thing that I was always impressed with the horse was the temperament of the horse. The horse is a top class temperament.
Oh yeah,
nothing fazed him whatsoever. You could stick him in a 5-mile Grand National, 40 fences. He'd have just lolloped his way round in his own time. He might not have liked it, but the horse, you could tell, was a machine. When people refer to horses as machines, they mean that they show machine-like qualities. They don't appear frail.
Yeah.
You know, that's what they talk about. It's not a derogatory term when in racing terms. It means that the horse is sort of transcending sport and is becoming something you can rely on.
Yeah.
Like a car.
Yeah.
You know, that's the difference. That is what we're talking about. You know, and you can tell with Justified that there were definitely elements of that within him. Just, you know, it all appeared so easy, didn't it, in his races?
Second Preakness win for winning jockey Mike Smith. Mike, you made your Triple Crown debut in 1984, 34 years ago. In 21 days, you will ride for a Triple Crown. Your thoughts going in?
Unbelievable. It's a dream coming true, you know, to be honest with you. It's been 25 years since I was blessed to win my first one, which was here, and to go into it with Bob and Jill and the whole crew and Windstar and China Horse Club and everyone who's involved and Jack Wolf, and I'm just so blessed to be riding for these people right now. I'm on cloud nine.
At the wire here, was Justified tired or waiting on competition?
A little of both, to be honest with you. He got a little tired. This is his hardest race that he's had, but he was also waiting on competition. It's awful loud out there. Track's pretty narrow, and he was kind of looking, jumping at tracks and doing a few things, but it was a good kind of tired. It's the kind of tired that I'm hoping anyway, and it felt like he'll move forward.
Congratulations, Mike. We will see you in 3 weeks in New York.
Thank you.
Mike Smith winning pilot for this 143rd Preakness Stakes.
Yeah, I mean, and you could even just see like the confidence that his jockey Mike Smith had on him. He never like really looked like he was in any doubt. And a lot of times, I mean, you saw it obviously in the races leading up to the Derby because they were a little bit easier, but it almost looked like he wasn't even fully being asked. You know, he did almost get beaten in the Preakness by Bravazzo. He was coming late at the end, but you know, he just kind of kept going and going and going. And even Mike Smith at the end said, yeah, he could have gone around the track one more time. You know, Mike Smith put away his whip, and I think he just had such a high cruising speed that he could just take it and just kind of go and lope along and just keep going the way that a lot of American horses can't. And yeah, I mean, he was just so impressive, and he just doesn't get flustered by anything. The crowds, the noise, the pressure, the rain on the track, the fog, just nothing seemed to faze him. He was completely dependable, just like you were saying.
Exactly. And I was laughing. I remember the Preakness now, watching it, and I was thinking, this is pretty weird as well regarding the weather. So foggy races over here are nothing new. You know, I've watched many a foggy race. Well, that's a contradiction in terms, I know that. One of my favourite tracks, Goodwood, actually, where we're racing this week in England, is actually very not this time of year, but it's actually very susceptible to fog. Mm-hmm. So I've watched about many horses at Goodwood and not known whether they've won or not until they've called the result. Just happens. So, but it wasn't that bad. But yeah, you come into the straight and you just about saw him. Regarding, like you said, Bravazzo, that's where people can say, look, this horse is beating absolutely nothing here in these Group 1s. Because Bravazzo that was probably his 10th run in that race. He'd been well and truly stuffed. He was one of the horses you'd have to say that qualified for the Derby, a proper horse, I know you said I was right earlier, what I said anyway, but this horse here sort of amplifies that, because this horse had qualified for the Kentucky Derby just by turning up and getting beaten in all these races, because you get probably 10, 20 points for finishing 3rd or 4th or 5th. That's basically how he got there, isn't it? So he did okay, and he's been probably a great credit to Connections. But to finish second in a Preakness, I don't know if that's great form or not. What do you think?
I was a little bit torn on it. I think it was a really big race, for him specifically, it was a big race. But since then, he actually just came back last weekend. He was second in the Haskell to Good Magic, who was the horse that was second in the Derby, pressed Justifying the Preakness. So Bravazzo came back and was second in the Haskell, and he threw a shoe. Huh?
Is the Haskell just for 3-year-olds then?
Yeah, it's basically the first big race for 3-year-olds after the Triple Crown season.
These 3-year-olds in America, they seem pretty protected to me. When are they all going to start taking on the older horses?
Probably around September. They really typically, I mean, in the U.S. you have you have all the horses up to the Triple Crown or all the races, and then you have the Haskell in the end of July, which is a prep for the Travers, which is, they call it the Midsummer Derby. It's in August, and
Is that a 3-year-old only race as well?
Yeah,
then?
these are all 3-year-old only. And then after that, you have...
Good Magic again for that one. Are they all over different trips, though, I'm assuming?
Yeah, so the Haskell is 1 mile and an eighth. The Travers is going back to the Derby distance of 1.25 miles. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And I know, actually, there's a point of interest, a filly that's going to run in the Travers this year named Wonder Godot. So that should be a really interesting...
Oh, yeah, that's won a couple of races. I've noticed that. That's won a couple of races, hasn't it?
Yeah, she won the Queen's Plate in Canada, which is kind of like their version of the Derby.
Yeah, right, Woodbine, correct. Yeah. We're at the last stage now. He's now really a superstar anyway. He's already won 2 legs of the Triple Crown. Before we touch on the last race at Belmont, just explain to our non-American listeners what the Triple Crown is, please.
So the Triple Crown is a series of 3 races held in the spring every year for 3-year-olds. It starts with the Kentucky Derby, which is 1.25 miles, and that's in Kentucky. Then the Preakness Stakes in Baltimore, Maryland, and that's 1 3/16, so it's a little bit shorter. And then the Belmont Stakes in New York, which is 1.5 miles. The 3 races are very close together, so there's only 2 weeks between the Derby and the Preakness, and 3 weeks between the Preakness and the Belmont. So the whole racing series is over within 5 weeks. And it's basically all the top 3-year-olds in the country will run in the Derby, and then you'll get a kind of an eclectic mix of that group of horses again in the Preakness and then again in the Belmont. It's pretty challenging to win all 3 races consecutively.
Yeah, I mean, we touched on the first 2 already. Justify, we've looked back on the show already, has already won the first 2. The Belmont, I think, totally. It is a totally different race. I mean, for a start, it's run in a totally different environment in New York, which is, well, people, the New York sports scene has got a reputation for a reason, hasn't it? It's boisterous out there, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. And I think especially when there's a Triple Crown on the line, it gets pretty crazy on Belmont Day. You know, they have to set a cap at the number of people that can come in every year. It gets pretty crazy. You know, when there's not a Belmont on the line, kind of the public loses focus and kind of forgets about it. But, you know, this year when Justify having won the Derby and the Preakness, there was a lot of fanfare going into that race.
Also, with the Belmont, there was a sizable step up in trip to really what we class in Europe, I class personally, and I think a lot of others do, as the blue ribbon distance of 1.5 miles. But that's not really the case in America, is it? 1.5 miles seems to be an extreme trip, classed as an extreme trip in America. I've not seen many races over 1.5 miles if I look through on a daily basis.
No, so here we only, pretty much with the exception of the Belmont, we don't really have a whole lot of races that are beyond 1.25 miles. So basically what you would consider the blue ribbon distance here in the U.S. would be 1.25 miles. So that's what you have the Kentucky Derby at. The Breeders' Cup Classic is 1.25 miles. Most of the major races for 3-year-olds and up towards the end of the year are either 1.125 miles or 1.25 miles. So that's really the classic distance here in the U.S. And then you have, at least on dirt, you pretty much only have the Belmont and maybe 1 or 2 other major races over the entire year that horses will run in. But it's really not a common distance, and there's not a whole lot of horses here that are trained to go that far.
Yeah, they might be bred to go that far, though. I mean, my classic example, and the reason I ask this, is because I'm waiting for a horse to run, and there's pretty much no races for me in the calendar what I can find. Free Drop Billy, you're obviously familiar with it. Mm-hmm. He's actually a half brother to a horse that runs over here called Hawkbill, and that horse wants 1.5 miles on turf. So I don't know what they're gonna do with that horse.
I think they're actually they're trying to make him a turf horse. I think
he will be a better horse on turf. I absolutely guarantee that.
Oh no, I agree. I think it would suit his way of running way more than running on the dirt. I think they probably just ran him on the dirt with the focus of trying to make it to the Kentucky Derby.
Hawkbill likes to lead as well, and Free Drop Billy, from what I can always see, has come off the pace as well, hasn't he?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He comes from way back.
Yeah, but Hawkbill, he just likes to lead in small fields. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with older Free Drop Billy. I'll be waiting for him anyway. He actually ran in the Belmont, didn't he? Free Drop Billy. Let's get it back on track.
Yeah, he did. So that's the last race that he had. He ran in the Derby, and then he skipped the Preakness and ran back again in the Belmont. I don't think he ran particularly well, which is not uncommon at Belmont Park for closers to not run well. It tends to favor horses that are closer to the front, coming around the last turn. But I think when they move him to turf, I think that'll fit him a lot better. I think that'll fit his running style. I think it'll fit kind of his breeding and everything like that. And it'll give him more opportunities to run longer distances, because they do actually have more longer races on the turf in the US than they do on the dirt.
He'll be back on track soon, but he was really an outsider for these classics. So it's fair to say he's got a long way to go yet, the old boy. But I think he'll get there in the end. So Justify, going into the Belmont, it's fair to say that Justify was a red-hot favourite, wasn't he, among both the American public and really, it's fair to say the bookmakers were running for cover, weren't they? They weren't. I mean, I never saw him any bigger than even money for that race. I don't know what the prices were like in America, but it wasn't a good thing, because there's no such thing in racing really. But he'd already beaten them twice. And a lot of people were expecting him to win, weren't they?
Yeah, I think there were two kind of groups that people fell into. It was the people that felt like he was going to win or had a really good shot to win, or he was unbeatable in some sense. And then there were the other people who just thought that he had been rushed too fast to make the Triple Crown, that he had no shot, that he couldn't get a mile and a half for whatever reason. People either fell into one camp or the other. But I think by the time the Belmont rolled around, most people were of the opinion that he was just far and away the best horse out of all of the country.
So yeah, he certainly was. I mean, his form was there.
I think the Triple Crown, I think it gets, a lot of America involved. They're watching it. That's what the classics were. Hopefully there's a horse going for a Triple Crown. And, I see it. I can tell it at the airports. When I'm going through the airports, complete strangers telling me, good luck, good luck in the Belmont. And so I think it brings a lot of people to the game, to the sport, understand a little bit more. And America's a sports kind of society, so I think it brings a lot of excitement. I think it brings a lot of, believe it or not, a lot of new owners. I saw that happen with American Pharoah. People want to get in the sport and they join these groups, and so I think it's just positive.
It's not a long wait. We're back with another chance, and maybe not a long drought, maybe a series of Triple Crown winners now.
Well, I mean, it's just, it gives you, let's see if he can do it, and so, I think, he's probably, now he just came out of nowhere, so now he's picking up steam, and, people say the same thing, oh, he's so beautiful, what a beautiful horse, so, he's just, he's become a rock star like Pharoah, and so everybody's, let's see if he can do it.
Bob, have you been practicing your throwing arm, warming up your throwing arm for throwing out the first pitch?
Oh, that deal? I don't know. You know what? I threw at Dodger Stadium about a year ago. I went out there and I could have hit a bird. I threw it pretty high there, and I asked Jill, how was that? She goes, it was good for a girl. And so, but I think when you hit 65, when you pass 60, you get a. It's not, you don't feel the pressure. When I was younger, I felt like I really don't bounce it. You don't want to bounce it. That's the worst thing you can do.
Oh, can you talk on Mike Smith and his qualities and what you like about him? Well,
Mike Smith is, he's like, he's like any rider. He's great, but he still has to have the horse under him. If he doesn't have the horse under him, then they're not as great as they are. But a good rider like him, they just keep a good horse from getting beat. His job is keep him out of trouble. Ride his horse. He's going to have to make some split, second decisions, and so I don't worry about that part of it. It's going to have a lot of pressure on him. So he's had it for the Derby and the Preakness and everything else. But we're all in the same boat. If it's meant to be, it's going to happen. So right now, all we can do is prepare him.
Do you feel pretty confident about what you've seen today, and here it is Belmont week now?
Yeah, I mean, you still need racing luck. He has to break well. I remember Pharoah was in the gate. That was he stepped back right when it opened, and he broke about a length off, and then he just hustled him immediately. Victor just got him. But that could have been bad. Somebody could have, if he would have stumbled, or somebody could have cut him off or whatever. So, I always worry about the break. The break's so important. And after that, you just got to let it happen. And so, I feel good that he's doing well. He looks great. Yeah, physically, he looks healthy. He's moving well. So that's all you can ask for.
But there was always the fly in the ointment of the English trained, formerly English trained, it's fair to say, Gronkowski, who initially was aimed at the Kentucky Derby by who I will say, Jeremy Nacida, I will say is in my view, one of the shrewdest trainers there is in the whole world. I've got no doubt about that. He's always been too smart for me. I can never work out what he's trying to do. And there he goes. All of a sudden there'll be a race somewhere, and it'll be a great result for Nacida, and fair play to him. You have to hold your hands up to men like that. But the Phoenix Thoroughbreds who had the horse, how are they perceived over there? These people that come over abroad, like Phoenix Thoroughbred and Coolmore. Is there sort of any animosity for them?
I haven't so much animosity towards them. I do think that Gronkowski was extremely underrated. People didn't think that he had the talent and didn't think that he belonged, which I thought was interesting because he had performed pretty well back in Europe, and he really his profile really fit Belmont really well. He was a big, long striding horse, kind of similarly to Justify. So it seemed like he would fit the trip really well, but I think a lot of people overlooked him in a sense. But he actually was a pretty popular horse among the non-horse racing kind of fans of the Belmont, just because
he's actually named after a famous American footballer, isn't he? That helped, didn't it? Raised his profile a bit, didn't it?
Yeah, so he is named after probably one of the most well-known football players in the country, Rob Gronkowski. And so I think that helped kind of stir the public support for him. But I think among horse racing circles, I think he was basically given no shot in the race at all.
Yeah, and I must admit, I gave him no chance because his form just wasn't good enough to entitle him to run well in that race from what he'd done before. I mean, you said quite correctly that he did win 2 races before he was aimed at the Kentucky Derby to qualify, but they were very poor races. An American, and it's worth noting here that all-weather racing in England is massively second class. Them races were basically invented as a path for the Breeders' Cup. I mean, for the Kentucky Derby, it was the first year they ever had the races. So that, especially one of them, it was just him and 3 or 4 others. It was there for him just to get the points. So it'll be interesting to see whether the European side of the pattern does kick off, because I was looking at it, and there's races like the Royal Lodge is worth 10 points for the Kentucky Derby. It's on turf, but if a horse wins the Royal Lodge, and you never know, do you? You have to start looking now. I've looked at the pattern, the road to the Kentucky Derby. It starts in September, and there's plenty of European races on it. So it'll be interesting to see what the Europeans make of it. But I, for one, don't think that a European horse can ever be competitive in that race, because if it's any good, it'll be aimed at our classics, not yours. I honestly do think that.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. It's a lot to ask for a horse to come over from Europe just for the Kentucky Derby or just for the American Triple Crown. I think the racing style here in the U.S. is very different from how it is in Europe, and obviously the dirt runs very differently from the turf. So you're right. If there's any horse that's really being targeted as like a top class horse in Europe, they're going to go towards the major races in Europe. They're not going to ship all the way to the U.S. for these 3 Triple Crown races and then ship back.
Yeah, I agree with you. You look at Mendelssohn. I'll use Mendelssohn as an example, who was aimed at the Kentucky Derby. He actually won the Breeders' Cup turf. So he's a turf horse. And they must have known that he was. I wonder if they're regretting it now, because it's not really worked out for them. They had Saxon Warrior beat a couple of times. Gustav Klimt got not even won a classic. US Navy flag stayed, dropped down to 6 furlongs. So, they must have thought at the time that Mendelssohn was more suited to the Kentucky Derby than the Guineas. I can't see how they'd come to that conclusion just on one run in the Breeders' Cup on grass. So it certainly is an interesting approach from them, because I do think that was a legitimate attempt by Coolmore to win that race. So I'm expecting them to have another go next year with something.
Yeah, and it's always fun to have international horses in the race. I know there hasn't been a whole lot of success specifically in the Kentucky Derby, but I think people are going to keep, if they are willing to take the chance and they're willing to send their horses to the U.S. instead of keeping them in Europe or Japan or whatever country they're from. I think as long as there is interest in running in the Derby, they're going to keep trying, because you have horses that come over here all the time for the Breeders' Cup and they're successful. Even when you're talking about dirt races like the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, the Breeders' Cup Classic, those kinds of things, you have international horses coming over here and running with success. So I think it's just kind of something that's been elusive to international runners, but I think it's safe to say people are going to continue to try. Whether there's going to be a huge amount of interest in horses from Europe, I don't think that will be the case, but I do think that there will be, groups like Coolmore that are willing to keep taking shot after shot after shot as long as they have the right horses.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it has to happen really, as I think they will. It's a global industry really. I've noticed that shuttle stallions are becoming a lot more common as well. Mm-hmm. People go from the Northern Hemisphere to Southern Hemisphere. That never really used to happen. I think that maybe just because there's too many stallions, I don't know, they have to go somewhere, but that never used to happen to me. I noticed, which one was it? Caravaggio has gone to Australia. Mm-hmm. Churchill's gone to Australia as well. And one of them's come here. That one that won the Golden Jubilee, Merchant Navy, is going to shuttle between both England and Australia as well. So is America worried about the growing reputation of Australian racing? Because over here, Australian racing is quite big. And before it used to be like English racing, then Irish and French, and then obviously the American racing. But now we've got the Australian racing over here is pushing the American racing quite closely. Is there much interest in Australian racing in America with horses like Winx?
I think people are interested in Winx. I don't know that people have been particularly interested in Australian running as a whole, which is a shame because you have some really talented horses down there. People followed Black Caviar when she was running. Now they're following Winx, but as a whole, they don't really follow racing in Australia. And unfortunately, I think it actually tends to be dismissed a little bit in the U.S. because people say, well, if people really thought that Winx or Black Caviar or whoever, if they really thought they were that good, why don't they take them outside of Australia and run them against, the real runners in Europe or the real runners in the U.S. or wherever? And I don't think that that's fair to the Australian runners because, they don't say that about the American horses, that we need to travel down to Australia to face Winx to prove that our horses are good enough. So I think in that sense, it gets a little bit beaten down here in the U.S., but people here are a big fan of Winx. I can watch Winx run from home on my television, and that's not something that is necessarily would be the case if it was just any race in Australia. So it's kind of a mixed bag, I would say.
Fair enough. Brilliant answer there. So the Belmont, we get to touch on the Belmont quickly. We've got to the end now, and it's fair to say that once again, jockey Mike Smith oozed confidence on the favourite. It's fair to say.
He, just coming out of the gate, knew exactly what he wanted to do. He wanted to take Justified to the lead. And so he just sent him out of there and then just kind of let him lope along and just go and go and go. And there was nobody that was able to catch him.
Justify in stall one. Will he take his place in history? As Blended Citizen goes in, they're all in line. We're ready for a start. They're off in the 150th Belmont Stakes. And it was a very good beginning for Justify, who goes immediately to the early lead in the race to the first turn. So it will be Justify to set the pace here. And there on the outside goes Restoring Hope, the other Bob Baffert trainee, who's wide into that turn and running in second position. Right in behind them in third is Bravazzo. Noble Indy is off the pace. And then on the inside comes Tenfold. The opening quarter mile was a swift one, 23.37 seconds. Very fast pace for Justify, who will lead the field on to the backstretch here with his stablemate Restoring Hope sitting in second. And on the inside, Bravazzo is third. Noble Indy is fourth. Tenfold fifth. Vino Rosso sixth. And Blended Citizen on the outside, followed by Hofberg and Free Drop Billy. Gronkowski is last. They've slowed things down a bit. 48.11 was the half. That's just a bit faster than American Pharoah went 3 years ago. Justify and Mike Smith, the Kentucky Derby and Preakness winner, head up the backstretch in the Belmont Stakes with a length lead. Restoring Hope on the outside is second. Bravazzo is down toward the inside. Noble Indy is next. Vino Rosso is close up running in fifth. He's 5 lengths off the lead. 3/4 went in 1 minute, 13.21 seconds. Halfway home in the Belmont. And then comes Tenfold on the inside of Blended Citizen. Hofberg is drafting in behind horses. 6 lengths off the lead. Free Drop Billy and Gronkowski, the last of them all. And Mike Smith and Justify make their run into the far turn. They've got a 2-length lead. Restoring Hope is put to a ride as Vino Rosso begins to rev it up on the outside. Bravazzo is down toward the rail. They've run a mile in 1:38.09 seconds. Justify is the leader, but it's just a half-length advantage here. Vino Rosso comes under a ride. Mike Smith has not asked Justify to go just yet. Justify a length lead here as they come to the top of the stretch. Vino Rosso is second. Hofberg comes on the scene, and Gronkowski has cut the corner, and they're into the stretch. And Justify comes roaring home to a raucous Belmont Park with 1 furlong to run. Gronkowski and Hofberg trying to run him down. Vino Rosso is fourth, a 16th to go. Justify is still there. Justify from Gronkowski. He's just perfect, and now he's just immortal. Justify is the 13th Triple Crown winner. Gronkowski was second, Hofberg was third, and Vino Rosso was fourth. Justify has done it.
No, and once again, it was what I touched on personally in the last show. He just lollops along, doesn't he? He just seems to travel so effortlessly through the races. And once again, over that trip, 1.5 miles. And like you said, I think the crowd was 80,000 that day, wasn't it? Something like that.
Yeah, I think they capped it at that, so it would have hit that number.
And he's the temperament again of the horse, absolutely flawless. You're like a dressage horse. He's never once did he look remotely bothered, did he?
No, he never seemed to bat an eye. The crowds didn't bother him. The yelling and the screaming and all of that didn't seem to bother him. He really just has no issue with going into the race, and he just is able to focus on what he has to do. He knows exactly what he needs to do. And I think part of it is that he seems to be I've heard Bob Baffert say that he's a really smart horse, and he just knows what his job is, and he goes out and does it, and he doesn't let the distractions seem to get to him at all.
I mean, the whole time he was just so professional. I mean, he really was. He was taking, the crowd in well. All the noise in the gate, I was, worried because, the crowd was screaming right in front of you there. And being in the one hole, he was standing so good, almost too good. I was a bit worried, but my gate man reassured me, said, we're okay. He's standing good. Trust me, he'll break. And he probably broke better today than he has, out of the other two, to be honest with you. He left there today very, very good, which was very important. Was able to go ahead and get a comfortable lead and then let him get into that rhythm of his, which he did very well. The first quarter was just a little bit quick, but then after that, I mean, he settled down and he got into a great rhythm, and I just kept a leg on each side at that point, and then mine in the middle, and when I asked him, I mean, he dug in. To win 6 races in such a short amount of time like he's just done is just an unbelievable feat on his part, and really Bob's just done a tremendous job to get this horse to do what we just got done doing. So
all week, since the Preakness, we felt really good about this horse, and he shipped in here really well. When I saw him train the first day here, he was just he went around there like they're supposed to go around there, and he's tipped us off from from his first race, but you still have to get around there. And I knew, the pace. He was going to have to ask him hard away from there and get him in there and get him going in the race. So going into the first turn, we saw those horses out there, and I saw the 23. Was it 23 and
23 and 3?
Yeah, so that was a little bit. Well, that's fast, and so. But then he slowed it down. When I saw 48, felt a little bit better. But I was talking to Jill, my wife, the whole way, and if we can get about a 13-3, 13-4, I think we're okay. And then he got 13. Was it 1? I thought, well, if he's great, it's doable. And then when he made that move in the far turn, I was like, oh, Mike, don't empty that tank, Mike. And so, turning for home, you could just tell this horse, he just finds the great ones. They just find another gear. And, I really didn't get excited probably to the last, 116th of a mile where I knew that, he was home free and started to really enjoy the race.
Well, to me, out of the 3, that was the only race I actually enjoyed. I think that was really due to the distance, though, because the other 2 just seemed to happen. The weather as well, the fog and the rain didn't help. But it just seemed to be a bit of a sprint, 1 mile sprint, and I don't like sprints. But this race, you could tell it was like watching not a proper horse race. They just had a good steady pace all the way round, and the best horse won. But for me, the eye catcher of the race, I don't know. I thought I was watching 2 races at once for the first half of it, because we have to really talk about the performance of the English trained runner, the former English trained runner. No disrespect meant to Chad Brown for any of these broadcasts. It's just I get so used to these trainers training the same horse all through their careers, because it doesn't really happen in England. They don't switch the horses about like they do in America. I've noticed that happens quite a lot out there, probably due to the country being so big, and they probably don't want to keep moving the horse back and forth. I don't know. But that must be why they do it, yeah? Thinking about it, must be why they do it, yeah?
Yeah, so you'll see a lot of times, like if an owner wants to, or an owner and a trainer talk, and they're like, we're based in California, but your horse would do way better on the East Coast in New York or in Florida or whatever, then they'll have to basically come up with they'll send the horse to a new trainer just to, give that horse the opportunity to compete in that other part of the country. Because you can travel back and forth, but it's a lot of wear and tear on the horse, and it's exhausting, and it can just makes things a lot tougher than just staying in one place. So if you're going to run consistently, if you're usually, if your horse is traced in California or trained in California, and you want to focus on races in New York, there's no reason to keep them in California if you're just going to ship back and forth.
But the same bloke might want to train the horse.
That's true. I think I haven't seen it happen. It doesn't happen every day, but I have seen it happen before, and that's usually one of the reasons why.
Yeah, it figures. It stands to reason that America is so vast. I mean, here you could get a horse to France and back in 4 hours, and you're struggling probably in America to get to some tracks in a couple of days, especially with these big thoroughbred animals and who they take the utmost care of when they travel. But Gronkowski, just for those who haven't watched the race before, just explain a little bit about his run during the race, because I don't know how common that is in America to see that horse do that, but I've never seen it. I was watching open mouthed. I was astonished.
Yeah, it's not a common thing. So in America, in the U.S., horses, it's very speed focused. So you typically see horses running on the lead, just off the lead, maybe a couple of lengths back. But for Gronkowski, he basically missed the break at the start. And he was trailing by, I don't know, probably at least 10 or 15 lengths at one point. And he was just so far behind, he wasn't even on the screen for the majority of the race. And then coming around the turn.
Yeah, that was brilliant, weren't it? Do you not think they deliberately did it then?
I don't think so. I think maybe they did. It would have fit the European style of racing better. But I can't imagine that his new trainer, since he moved to the U.S., Chad Brown, I can't imagine that Chad Brown said, take him, 15 lengths off the pace and then try to come back at the end and pick off all the other horses. There's historically in the Belmont Stakes, horses are in the top 3 with about half a mile to go. Those are the horses that are winning. So the fact that he was able to come from that far back in a race that tends to be won from the front end was just super impressive.
I mean, if it's another half a furlong, he'd have won, wouldn't he?
That's a good question. I don't know. He was catching up to Justify at the end, but people were saying that after the Preakness too, they were saying, oh, if the race was, a little bit longer than a mile and 3/16, Justify wouldn't have won, so he probably won't win the Belmont. I think it's tough to say because his cruising speed is just so fast that he can just kind of go that pace forever.
Oh, yeah, I totally accept that argument. You have to know where the winning post is. I know that from watching French racing. I mean, the one in front at the post is never the one in front after the post. It's always the same. So that is a very valid argument that Mike Smith has been riding for a very long time, and he knew where the winning post was, didn't he? And he knew it was a funny race to watch because not once when Gronkowski was tailed off did the jockey on him look worried. And that's why I thought they must have. I thought the same as you initially. I thought what they're doing is either A, terribly outpaced, or B, it's a legitimate tactic. Because they weren't niggling him along to maintain a position, they seemed perfectly happy with him back there. And the same with Mike Smith in the lead. He must have known that horses would be coming back at him after leading all the way, but not once did he overexert the horse, did he, towards the end of the race?
No, it was interesting to watch because you're right. A lot of times in the U.S. with a horse as far back as Gronkowski was, you'll see the horse being basically pushed the entire way to catch up. And I think, I don't remember off the top of my head who the jockey was, but he did a really good job of just letting Gronkowski settle into his stride, settle into the race, and then make one big run at the end. And same thing with Justify. He did that first quarter was pretty quick. I want to say it was like 23-2, which is pretty fast for the first quarter of a race that's a mile and a half. And he just kind of let the horse settle and he didn't make him do any more than he needed to get the job done. So I think both of those jockeys did a really excellent job that day.
Yeah, I mean, it was a good race. I enjoyed it, and I thought that Justified was a good winner on that day. Mm-hmm. But for me, the horse without any shadow of a doubt moving forward to take out of that race was the former English trained horse. I mean, what a performance! It just made me wonder what he could have done if he hadn't have got injured before the Kentucky Derby. It really did. Because I touched on it before and I'll touch on it again. That trainer is shrewd. Mm-hmm. And for him to put him in that race, because you have to declare the races for the Triple Crown. You have to nominate them months in advance, don't you?
Yeah.
Before they're even eligible to qualify, don't you? So for Mr. Nacida to nominate that horse even before it even ran, he knew what he had, didn't he? So it might have gone close in Kentucky. You don't know.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm disappointed that he didn't make the race. I think it would have been interesting to see how he did. And I think he probably would have done a lot better than a lot of people expected. And it might have, like you're saying, it could have completely changed the direction that the Triple Crown went altogether.
Oh, I ain't no doubt at all he'd have outran his price at Kentucky because he did in the Belmont. He was underestimated in the Belmont, and looking back with hindsight, he was obviously underestimated in the market for Kentucky as well. Looking at his run in the Belmont, there's no other conclusion you could draw from that.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see where that horse goes next as well, and it'll also be interesting to see how the other Phoenix Thoroughbred horses who were switched from Jeremy Nacida's yard to America will go as well, because there are winners there. I don't know about them yet. I've not noticed any, but as soon as I do, I'll be finding them without any shadow of a doubt. I know what the horses are because I had someone message me saying, "Oh, where can I find these horses?" And I looked. I know where to find them. There's only about 8. But a lot of them. The trouble is, what Phoenix Thoroughbreds do is they name them in different. So Phoenix Thoroughbred 1, Phoenix Thoroughbred 2, and they might not just have one horse in each. Mm-hmm. So it's quite difficult to get them all together. I've noticed that in Europe. The ones trained by Martin Mead are like Phoenix Thoroughbred 5 or something. And they might have another one with Richard Ann, and it'll have totally different owners. So it's quite hard to collate the information, even though it's the same people. But I think there'll be winners there with them, and it'll be interesting to see what they do with that horse Gronkowski next time out. Have you got any news on when he might run?
I have not. I want to say they're pointing him towards the Travers Stakes, which is run in August, but I'm not positive
that would be the logical race for a runner-up in the Belmont to go for, yeah?
Yeah, so that's going to be basically the first. They call it the Midsummer Derby in the U.S. It's another 3-year-old race, and it's run at a 1.25 miles. So it's the second opportunity that the 3-year-olds have to go that classic American distance of a 1.25 miles. So it's a big focus for a lot of horses coming off the Triple Crown trail. They'll get back onto it. They'll go, usually have maybe one race after the Belmont, and then they'll go to the Travers Stakes next.
Gronkowski needs a mile and a half, though, Elizabeth. He's just proved that in emphatic style, surely. Do you honestly think he can keep up with them over 10 furlongs? He struggled over 12, didn't he, at the start? Do you honestly think how's he going? It'll be interesting to see what happens, that's for certain.
Yeah, I don't know that we've had enough. Like, he did miss the break, he missed the start, and he didn't have the speed, but I'm wondering if maybe under an American trainer, training more towards the American style of racing, that might change. Because he wasn't really in the U.S. that long before that. I'm wondering if now that he's had more time to...
No, he wasn't. They were aiming him at a race before. I can't remember which one it was. It might have been the Bluegrass, but they decided to run at Newcastle instead on the all-weather. But there was talk of him having a prep run out there over in Europe anyway. I don't know if that resonated as far as America, but there was talk of it. He did have him entered in a few races in the Cedar in America, but he just chose to run him at Newcastle instead. So it would have been interesting. That would have been interesting as well. But obviously, why we're doing this programme, there is obviously one horse that won't be running in the Travers Stakes or any other race for that matter. That was Justify. Give us the listeners a quick update on what happened after the Belmont with Justify up to the current date.
So they decided they were going to give him not necessarily time off, but give him a little bit of a break and not bring him back for, a month or so. And we went a while and he didn't have any timed workouts or anything like that. And then it came out that he had a little bit of swelling in his ankle. So they took a week off, brought him back. The swelling came back, so they went and had to evaluate it. They haven't been public about what the injury was, but it was something that was going to take, and it wasn't a serious injury. It was pretty minor. That's about as far as we know, but the amount of time it was going to take to heal was going to exceed the amount of time that they would need to get ready for the Breeders' Cup at the end of the year. And they'd already decided they were going to retire him at the end of this year. They weren't going to run him as a 4-year-old, so they just went ahead and retired him. So he's down and out for the count.
Yes, and that really ends a remarkable 5 months racing for one horse. It is the stuff of movies, isn't it? Especially with him actually breaking the curse we touched on, the curse of Apollo. They'll make a movie out of it, wouldn't they?
I would hope so.
Surely.
They have a movie about Secretariat. They have a couple of horse racing movies. I think he would be a good focus of one just because what he was able to accomplish in just 4 months is absolutely unheard of here in the U.S. I don't know as much about European racing, but the fact that he was able to go from being unheard of to winning the most elusive award, I guess you could say, winning the most elusive series of races in the country in just 4 months with almost no seasoning, no experience. Realistically, he should have been extremely immature. Like, that is just unbelievable, and I think it's not something that we're going to see ever again, and if we do, it's going to be a very long time before we do.
Yeah, I mean, who do you think should play him?
Say that again?
Who do you think should play him?
Who did I think should play him? Oh,
in the
Justify?
film. Yes.
I don't know, a chestnut with a white blaze.
Yeah, okay, yeah, cool. I mean, yeah, personally, you asked about European racing. There's not a comparison because we touched on the road to the Kentucky Derby. And we don't encourage our horses to run like that. I remember a horse called Ganati. It won the Guineas on its second start. It won an all-weather maiden at Kempton as a 2-year-old in November or September time, and then went straight to the Guineas first time out and won. So there's not really there is not, I don't think, a legitimate comparison. A horse could theoretically run in the Guineas here first time out. It could theoretically. Don't have to qualify for it. Just have to enter it and run it and keep paying the supplementary fees through the season. That's it. There's no qualifying for the Guineas. So there's not really a fair comparison. Totally different. But yeah, Justify for the months he raced, he gave a lot of people a lot of pleasure, didn't he? Because a lot of people did really take to the horse, didn't they? Especially on the social media outlets that I've seen.
Yeah, he was a very popular horse. I think he did a lot for the sport, and the fact that his trainer was already pretty well known. Bob Baffert did win the Triple Crown in 2015 with American Pharoah. So the fact that his trainer was already kind of in the public eye and he's does a really good job of making his horses accessible and sharing things with the media and being kind of a public presence. And I think all of that. And then I think Justify just kind of has this kind of charismatic presence about him. He's just big and beautiful, and he just kind of exudes this confidence, you could say. And I think people are really drawn to that.
Absolutely, you can tell because he's such a laid-back character as well. I think that's what the American people liked about him as well. That some of these American sires and these American horses I've seen, they're like bucking broncos. Some of them, aren't they? Going down to the start. Yeah. You have to be ponied down to the start. They have to be ponied down to the start. They play up before they go in the stalls. They like to show who's in charge, don't they? But Justify just took it all in his stride, didn't he? Like a police horse.
Yeah, exactly. So you do have a lot of those horses here. We had a horse several years ago, Quality Road, who actually, I want to say he had to scratch a couple of times because they couldn't get him into the starting gate. One of my favorite horses, Shackleford, was known for acting up before the start of pretty much every race. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty unique to see a horse like Justify who just kind of walks out there, does his thing, comes back, nothing faces him at all.
I'm glad you mentioned old Shackleford there because I'm actually watching a Coolmore horse who's actually the dam is a brother to Shackleford. He won the Preakness, didn't he, Shackleford? He won.
Yeah, he
anyway.
did back in 2011.
Yeah, I'm never familiar with the horse, but yeah, it's called Could It Be Love? It's a Coolmore filly. They've won it on the turf 10 times. It's never won a race. They've won it on the all-weather once. It's won once. So it's interesting to me when that horse goes on the dirt, he might be a totally different horse altogether.
Yeah.
So Justify now off to stud a bit now. So that's it. Now, how do you think he'll go in stud in America? Do you think will they support him? Will he get the top mare straight away, or do you think he'll have to earn his place? Because I think it's worth pointing out now that the reason I think personally the rush was there around Justify was really to protect a bloodline, because the sire of Justify, a horse called Scat Daddy, who I've never heard of personally, but he was a superb sire of it. Obviously, that was. So there has been a bit of a rush to get sons of Scat Daddy to stud, hasn't there?
Scat Daddy ran Derby probably about 2008, I want to say, maybe 2009. And he was actually injured in the race. He finished, I think, 18th, never ran again. And he was retired and was sent to stud. And he just had a very successful career as a sire. He had numerous Grade 1 winners. He was only alive until about 9 years old, and then he had a heart attack and passed away. But even in that time, I mean, he obviously had Justify. He had Aurelia, who's been successful both in the U.S. and across the pond in Europe. He was also the sire of Mendelssohn. So he's had a bunch of very successful horses and in a very short period of time. So he was on his way essentially to becoming probably one of the best studs of all time. And then he died. And so Justify is a crop. And so I think that is actually one of the reasons why they were so conservative with him, is because they wanted to protect that line and then hopefully continue that success through Justify.
Yeah, it happens, doesn't it? When horses, like anything really, they become more valuable when they die. And that's just a fact of life. You look at a painter, look at an artist or somebody who paint a picture. As soon as he dies, it probably triples in value, you know. And horses are the same, you know. So without any shadow of a doubt, he will prove to be quite popular at stud, I should imagine. You know, but there's always a chance that he could prove subfertile or something. So hopefully they won't have any problems with that. But what a few months it was for the horse, and a great journey really as well.
Oh yeah, I mean so as a fan, I was really disappointed that he was retired after such a short period of time. I understand the reasons why, and I think with the intention of retiring him at the end of the year, it makes sense why they did it. But it is kind of disappointing for me that they weren't willing to give him another year, just because it's really difficult to kind of evaluate where he fits in history. Like, he is only the second undefeated Triple Crown winner of all time, but he never got to run against anyone but those horses in that 3-year-old crop. And so I think it's difficult to really evaluate with such a short career of only 4 months where he kind of fits in the history books. And he's obviously, you know, had the potential to be one of the best, if not close to the best horse of all time, just with what he was able to accomplish in the short period that he was running. But I do think that he'll be very successful at stud just based on Scat Daddy's success and the way his bloodlines are. I think he'll prove to be pretty successful at stud as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. And as a fan, it'll be fun to follow his babies as they grow up and race and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about it the other night. I'll be amazed if Khalid Abdullah, Judmont, don't send him a mare and call it Justification, because he likes to call his horses things like that. I just thought that's a certainty. Abdullah will do that. He'll do that. Mm-hmm. So that'll be interesting to see what happens, because yeah, like you say, he will certainly attract. Well, he's obviously going to be pigeonholed a bit. We're talking here. It's always worth remembering that we're talking about a horse that has never ran a race on turf in his life.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's a pretty common thing in the U.S., though. You don't have a whole lot of successful dirt horses that make that transition to turf. And you do have a couple. We had California Chrome a couple of years ago who ran, won the Kentucky Derby, won the Preakness, and then ran later on turf. But it's not, because most of the money and most of the prestige in American racing is on the dirt. You don't have a whole lot of successful dirt horses making the transition to turf. It's more common to have turf horses running on the dirt, or having a horse that isn't quite at the level that owners and trainers think they can be on the dirt, and so then they'll move them to the turf to hope to get a little bit better performance. But it's not uncommon here to have horses that only run on the dirt.
So moving forward then, do you think that, how big a hole has Justify's absence left on the remainder of the American season? Is it all now Justify's retired? Is it all, let's get cracking with next year's Triple Crown then, or is it all roads to the Breeders' Cup, or has everyone sort of lost interest now the best horses retired?
I think you'll find that the casual fan will lose interest, because a lot of time Americans will only pay attention to the Triple Crown unless they follow horse racing pretty religiously. They only pay attention to the Triple Crown as it is. So the fact that he's already retired really didn't help the sport gain any new fans, because those people follow him for the rest of the year and kind of start to get to know horse racing a little bit better. But as far as, the racing for the rest of the season, I think it remains to be seen. There was talk at the beginning of the year about how this year's crop of 3-year-olds is one of the best that we've seen in a while. And I don't know if it's because Justify was able to win all 3 races, or the fact that he won them relatively easily, but that talk has kind of shifted now, and people are saying it's a pretty weak crop of 3-year-olds. I'm of the opinion that our older horses are not that strong. So it'll be interesting to see kind of who can step up, and if someone really does stamp themselves on the rest of the year and say, comes out and says that they're the best horse besides Justify for the year, or if it just ends up being kind of a dud of a year. I'm curious to see how it turns out.
I mean, me personally, I think I was always of the opinion that it was an average crop from the very, very, very first time I started, because when I first started, I looked at the first 3 trials that I looked at, with the Bluegrass, Wood Memorial, and the other one that was run on the same day, Santa Anita Derby. And I didn't really see that many well-bred, what I would consider well-bred classic horses in it. I saw 4 or 5 that you could trace back 3 or 4 generations, Enticed, Hofburg, a few others, but there wasn't really that much in there, And it seems to me that a lot of the best ones came towards the end. Like Tenfold was quite a well-bred horse. I don't know how he's doing these days. And there was another lightly raced bob.
There was a horse, McKinsey, but he got hurt and didn't make it to the Derby. But he's coming back. He was actually supposed to be Baffert's top Derby horse at one point. Obviously, this was before Justify came on the scene, but so he's starting to work again. So he will hopefully be pretty successful come the end of the year. I think you're right about Hofburg. He's a pretty talented horse who hadn't really run a whole lot at the beginning of the year. Good Magic has a shot. He just he was second in the Derby, ran with Justify all the way in the Preakness, and he just came back and won the Haskell Stakes, or the Haskell Invitational, by about 5 lengths. So that was a pretty good win. So there's definitely horses who have the potential to be very successful. I'm with you. I don't think there's going to be 10 or 15 of them, but there's a handful that could be pretty good. I'm just not sure exactly how it's going to shake out.
There's one I'm keeping an eye on, and I think it's a good horse. It won last time out as well. It's called Blended Citizen. It's a brother to a horse that was actually third in both the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness, I think.
Yeah, that horse was so. Looking at Lee is a really interesting horse. He was a really, really long shot in the Derby and just kind of got the perfect trip and peaked at the right time.
Finished fourth, I think, and then I think he finished fourth in the Derby and he was third in the Preakness as well. I think, and the Blended Citizen is a brother to him, so that's one I did notice, and I noticed he did win last time out as well. So there's another one I looked at as well that didn't really figure on in the Derby was Kantaka.
Yeah, so they actually back again. I think they brought him back down to a sprint, if I remember correctly, and he
7 furlongs and he won, didn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one to keep an eye on too. He is based out of California, and I haven't seen his name pop up recently. But I agree. I think he does have the potential to be super successful. And he was actually one there up at the beginning of the year who was running against McKinsey and Voltoro in that race that we were talking about. He was third by both of them. So he has the potential. He's clearly a talented horse.
Third. That day, though, I don't think he gave his best run that day because I actually fancied him a little bit for that race on the sly. I think if you look at his other runs after that, they rode him a lot handier in that race than they did in that race. And I don't necessarily think it entirely suited him being so near up to the pace. He won a race before that to get a shot at the Santa Anita Derby, and he was held up then quite not as extremely as Gronkowski. That's taking it to the upper limits of holding up a horse. But it weren't far off. It weren't far off that. He was quite off the pace and just come through at the end. So he looks a good horse to me. Hofberg is just bred to be a better horse next year. I don't know whether that's common in America that they will run horses at 3 and they will be better at 4 or 5. But say in Europe it is quite common. You know, Hofberg is a typical Juddmonte 4, 5, 6-year-old horse. He'll be still going then if they have a fair run with him because he's well bred. And there's a lot of Juddmonte, good Juddmonte horses. They always improve for age without any shadow of a doubt. You know, we saw that with Frankel. Frankel was unstoppable at 3 and 2, but he was the complete racehorse at 4. It was just equine brilliance, and that's what these Juddmonte horses do. I'm not quite sure all American horses do that, but with Juddmonte horses, they do it. Hofberg
I think you're right, and I think he's one of the ones that will. So a lot of times in America, the top horses are retired after they're 3, just because there's so much money in breeding and in standing a horse at stud. But I think you're right. He is one that's going to keep running because I think he started his career late. He only had 3 races going into the Derby, and he was super successful and obviously very talented. But he just hasn't had enough seasoning to really be in a lot of positions to have won a lot of big races. And I think that, as this year progresses and he steps back up into those grade 1 races again, and I think as next year rolls around, I think you're right. He has the potential to be a very serious horse. I just think right now it comes down to his lack of seasoning and his lack of opportunities to show that.
I think they're just being patient with him, to be honest. I think they know what they've got. I think we'll just give him this year as his introduction year, really, so to speak. And next year, I think they'll go for it full guns blazing with him. Be a different horse next year. You watch, different horse. Nice winter on his back. They always do it. Even CIC, all the Juddmonte horses I can think of have always been better at 4 than 3. Absolute brilliant breeding they are. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with all these horses. So Elizabeth, we could probably talk forever about horse racing, but I don't think people could listen to it forever. So unfortunately, we're going to think about wrapping up this Justify preview now. Before we think about wrapping it up, is there anyone you would like to give shout outs to on the radio? Anything? If people you think might be listening to this broadcast back in Arizona when it's eventually broadcast out, is there anyone?
So I have a couple of people that I know. I know them mostly from Arizona, but they kind of travel all over. So I mostly spend time at Turf Paradise. So basically everyone at Turf Paradise that I hang out with, jockeys. So Leslie Mowing and his brother Mario mowing. Those are probably the two that I would talk to. And then I have another jockey that I'm friends with named Jesus Castanon. And those are probably the three people that I would like to say hello to.
There you go. So consider that done. So Breeders' Cup. I mean, we touched on it briefly yesterday. I mean, I dread to think what's going to happen there this year, because I'd actually go there, probably end up backing more American horses than I would European horses this year for the first time ever, and I'll probably pick more winners as well. But over in the States, obviously, racing is so much different to European racing. So what I thought I would do to my new co-host, who I'm sure when people hear this show will agree that what a terrific job she's done. Can you just confirm to the listeners that you have actually never done this before, have you? Because I don't still believe you, but there you go.
I have not. This is my first time.
Fair enough. You've got nothing to gain by lying, have you? So I believe you. So, Breeders' Cup. If I was to say to you, Elizabeth Pepper, reputation on the line, give the listeners two horses that they need to be looking out for in the Breeders' Cup, preferably not in the same race, although that would be acceptable, then what two horses would you give at the minute, and why?
So the first one that I think is interesting is Wonder Godot. She's a 3-year-old filly. She was second in the Kentucky Oaks, and then they put blinkers on her, sent her up to Canada, and she won the Queen's Plate, which is kind of the Canadian version of the Kentucky Derby. She won the first two legs of the Canadian Triple Crown, and they're bringing her back to America to run in the Travers. So I'm depending on how she does in the Travers, since she seems like a new horse with blinkers on, I think they might be planning on focusing her towards the Breeders' Cup Classic, in which case I think she is a very intriguing horse. I think 1.25 miles is her best distance. She's bred extremely well, and ever since they put blinkers on her, she has gone from being almost a top class horse to like really having hit that next level. To see how she does, and I'm very excited to see her finish out this year and head to the Breeders' Cup.
I mean, my first thought there was why won't she go for the fillies and mares?
Say that again?
Why won't she go for the fillies and mares race?
I think they're trying to win the 3-year-old like Eclipse Award championship with her this year, and as of right now, this year's Oaks winner, Monomoy Girl, kind of got that wrapped up, and so I think it would take a lot for Wonder Godot to snatch that away from her, only facing the fillies and the mares. Monomoy Girl has already won her twice this year, but I think they're hoping that in the Breeders' Cup Classic down the line, it'll be a much tougher schedule than if they only raced her against her own gender. And so I think the plan is, and I think that's why they're focusing on it. And I really appreciate as a sportsmanship them willing to like kind of take her up what could potentially be an easier path and being willing to, because that's not happens a whole lot in the US.
So yes, it'll be interesting to see how Wonder Godot gets on in the Breeders' Cup. You obviously fancy that one. So let's move on now to, last but not least, to the second horse of the Breeders' Cup that you think that people should be looking out for, Elizabeth.
Yeah, so another horse that I'm interested in is XY Jet. So he was just second in Dubai. He's a sprinter. And he basically was really successful, and then I think he got hurt or he got sick or something happened, and he was off for almost a year. And he just came back and has just been basically running people or running other horses off their feet in all of the sprint races here. So I'm really excited to see him come back. He's just this big, beautiful gray, and I think he has a lot of talent and a lot of potential to do really well in the Breeders' Cup as well.
And that'll be what, the Breeders' Cup Sprint, turf or dirt?
The Breeders' Cup Sprint, so it'll be 6 furlongs, so about 3/4 of a mile.
And that's on the grass or on the dirt?
On the dirt.
Oh, I remember the race in Dubai. Got beat off that one that come with a late charge, didn't it? Mind Your Biscuits?
Yeah, and actually Mind Your Biscuits just ran today in a race that's 1 1/8 miles, so I don't know if they're pointing him towards the sprint this year or if they're hoping that he can stretch out and run in the Classic. I don't really know what their plan is with him. But yeah, XY Jet actually almost won in Dubai, and he got beat like right on the wire by Mind Your Biscuits, who just had an unbelievable late charge.
Yeah, I remember speaking to somebody about that race, and I said to him, because I'm not really familiar with all the horses out there, I was actually watching the wrong horse in that race for 99 hundredths of it.
Yeah, I think everybody was actually.
Because I didn't know what the colours were. I thought Mind Your Biscuits obviously won, so I had it on mute. So I assumed that XY Jet was Mind Your Biscuits, and then all of a sudden the winner come from nowhere, didn't it? It was an incredible turn of foot, really.
Yeah, he wasn't even in the picture on the screen. He literally came.
Yeah, it was incredible. So XY Jet and Wonder Godot, then, you think they would be two horses to look out for? Would they be likely to be among the favourites for those races, or are they genuine outsiders, or just horses you like, or would you say they were horses with a genuine chance of winning the race?
I think that XY Jet is going to be one of the favorites for the sprint. I think that Wonder Godot, honestly, if she goes to the Classic, I think she's going to be a relative long shot. Even if she goes into the Distaff, which is the dirt version of the Classic, but for fillies and mares, I think even if she goes there, she's going to be, probably like 7 or 8 to 1. But I think she's a super talented horse, and I honestly think she has a good shot in definitely the Distaff and maybe the Classic, depending on how the rest of her year goes.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that dirt race, the Distaff. Yeah, that's the fillies and mares. Obviously, is always run on turf, isn't it? Yeah, of course. But yeah, I would say that they like to keep them to their own sex in races like that, unless they are really, really special. But yeah, good luck to her. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what race she goes for. So heading towards the Breeders' Cup then quickly before you go. What's the next big meeting? I know in America, like, they have festivals, don't they, in certain parts of the states. Where's the place to be in American racing at the moment?
So there's a couple places. I would say there's 2 main ones. The first one is Del Mar in California. So in California, you have 3 major tracks, and the one that they're running at right now is Del Mar. So that's where they have all of the big West Coast races right now. And then on the East Coast, the big one is in Saratoga in New York. So they just had the Whitney Handicap there today, which is one of the major races for older horses, classic kind of horses. And then they had the test stakes also for 3-year-olds. It was a dirt sprint. But those would be the 2 tracks that I would keep an eye on right now.
And moving forward as well, do you expect any other American horses to be racing abroad this year, or really are they campaigned mainly in America?
I think they'll be campaigned mostly in America for the rest of the year. The horses that you have that do go abroad, it's typically for Royal Ascot, or they'll go up to Canada, Canadian Triple Crown. So I think both of those, since both of those are already over, I think they'll stick to America for now.
You've got Dubai as well, haven't you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that one too. But that's also, that's not until March. So
would really the focus of the American season now all be geared towards moving towards the Breeders' Cup?
Basically going to be the Breeders' Cup. There's going to be some Grade 1s across the country from now until then that are pretty big races. But you'll have the Jockey Club Gold Cup and a couple other races like that. But really the focus is going to be on the Breeders' Cup, and you're not going to have any races that bring all of the top horses together until then in the first weekend of November.
I mean, when I was growing up as a kid following American racing briefly from a European perspective, one race that was always deemed as quite a big race by the European trainers, and you've not even mentioned it, is the Arlington Million.
Yeah,
is that not a big race to Americans then?
It is a big race for the turf horses, but because most of American racing is focused on the dirt, I don't know that it gets quite as much attention as it probably could have. And that race, I think, is coming up pretty soon. But yeah, I think because it's most people don't focus on that one as much as they do the dirt races.
I think what's it called might win that. So he's already had a run in America as well. I noticed to slip that one by me as well, and he even got beat, which amazed me as well. Was the Coolmore horse, Hunting Horn. I think that might be going for the Arlington Million, I think.
Yeah, that is probably one of the biggest turf races that we have here in the country. It's just that because it's not on the dirt, people don't focus on it as much.
So, Elizabeth, may I just take this opportunity quickly before we wrap up to say thank you very much for co-hosting this Justified Tribute. It really was a great 6 months racing, and I'm glad you all enjoyed it over there in America.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was a really great opportunity, and it was really fun. And I look forward to doing this again.
Yeah, like I said, it's up to you. Just have a look at some races, get in touch, and we can do plenty more yet. But definitely we'll be hearing from Elizabeth Pepper again in the future. So, but for now, Elizabeth, may I just say thank you very much again. You've been an absolutely fantastic debutant. Not as good as Justify, obviously, but I'd say you're definitely group class at least already,
thank you.
wouldn't you?
I'll take it.
I think there's room for improvement though. I think you're progressive. I think we'll class you as progressive, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. Elizabeth, thank you very much and goodbye.
Goodbye.